Good morning. I want to thank all of you patients first. They should always come first. Their families, our esteemed members of the FDA, thank you for being here today, and for the porphyria experts who have saved our lives, we thank you for attending this morning. I'm Desiree Lyon-Howe. I'm Executive Director of the American Porphyria Foundation, but mostly I'm also a patient who's had 100 attacks, hospitalizations, 30 intensive cares, totally paralyzed twice, and thank goodness for the very first orphan drug, panhematin, which saved my life, and for the doctors here today, the porphyria experts. I'd like to welcome first Dr. Richard Macheski, who is making a big impact both in the patient world and the medical world on explaining why we need patients' voice in this drug development process. You want there? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Desiree. It's delightful to come and be with patients here. As a physician, that's what it's really all about. And in fact, I think it's interesting when we talk about patient-focused drug development because it's always been the focus of drug development. Why else do we do this? Why else do we develop new drugs? It's for you. It's for patients. So it's kind of interesting to think about what role have patients played in drug development. Well, obviously, there wouldn't be clinical trials if it wasn't for the willingness of patients to enter into those clinical trials and subject themselves to it. And then I think really companies that are thinking about developing drugs have been wise when they actually go and talk to patients before they even do the clinical trials to find out from those patients, things that would help them design those clinical trials. For example, if we have you come every day, can you actually do that, or in our protocols? And talk to them about the selection of endpoints. I mean, if you think a disease has a certain problem associated with finding out how many patients actually have that problem before you decide that's an endpoint you're going to do in your clinical trial. And then patient advocacy organizations have begun to develop and have been invaluable in helping to put together an understanding of the disease by natural history studies and helping sponsors recruit patients for those type of clinical endpoints. But what about FDA? What about the regulatory authorities? So what role can and have patients played there? Because that's, in a way, what we're really here to talk about today. And, I have to say, and I've used this before, others who've heard me talk about this, I was in drug development from the sponsor side for 21 years. And 20 years ago, I sat across the table from my FDA colleagues, and we were talking about a rare disease, and I said, you really got to talk to a patient. And the response I got, I understood, but still surprised me a little bit, was no, that might bias us. We just need to focus on the science. That's changed, I assure you. At FDA today, we are keenly interested in hearing from the patients and getting that kind of input. So over the years, there have been a number of ways to do it. We have a patient representative on our advisory committees when we meet to talk about things. We often meet with patients when we go to a variety of meetings like the National Organization of Rare Disease meetings, and they are there and we can talk, sometimes just in the hallways. Patients give us citizens petitions. When we put out a Federal Register notice, often patients will provide comments. We've even had patient advocacy organizations give us a proposed guidance for how to develop drugs for the disease that patient advocacy organization was interested in, that we have taken very seriously and looked at. And then we often get a lot of emails and letters from patients that express their points of view. But the most powerful of all the mechanisms has been the patient-focused drug development meetings that were developed. Now, these were developed back as part of PDUFA 5 and FDASIA. These are legislative initiatives and user fee efforts that told us to go ahead and start having meetings with patients. And so we scheduled, in the first years of this, 24 FDA-sponsored meetings with patients. And we went through a whole process to select the diseases of the patients who would be represented in this. It was a public process. We were really interested more in the chronic, symptomatic diseases that affect daily living and functioning. And so from that, we selected these 24 different areas to go in. And what we were really looking for was to get information on what's that burden of your disease. What is it that's really bothering you as a patient? What's most important to you? If you could fix something about your disease, what would be the most important thing that you could fix? Because that would tell us a lot about what's the most important endpoints that we should be looking at when we talk to sponsors who are developing drugs for you. We want to know, how unmet is your need? How good are the treatments that you're getting right now? Do they really solve the problem? Do they partially solve the problem? What are the side effects that those treatments now really are causing you, that really limit maybe those current treatments that you might have available to you? What benefits ultimately are you going to value the most? And we also kind of want to get at that degree of unmet medical need that is there to kind of give us that framework of how to really process the benefits and the risks. And on that risk side, we're really interested in hearing about your risk for your risk for your tolerance for risk. You know, how do you look at this? You know, and we find that there's a range, right? One patient doesn't always think the same as another patient. So trying to get a sense of that range of how people look at risk. Are you willing to accept, perhaps, a treatment that might threaten your life or threaten your child's life? Are you willing to accept, or you're not? Maybe you're not. You said, no, I don't want that. Are you willing to accept a drug that has a different kind of risk, maybe of some kind of permanent disability? So trying to get a frame for that is something that we're very interested in looking at in these meetings. And I can tell you, they have been terrific. The output from these meetings is then put together by a team at FDA. Actually, I see Teresa Mullen hiding back there. Teresa's been instrumental in organizing and getting these meetings together and off the ground. But the really important people who attend these meetings are the review divisions. They're the ones who have the decisions that are making trying to put all this together and incorporate it into their thinking when they review a product or help work with a sponsor to get things together. So Teresa's people put together a report called The Voice of the Patient that summarizes all of that and can be used by the review divisions, can be used by anybody. They're publicly available. And I can tell you, I think these meetings have really made a difference in my observation for how the review division then gets to actually understand these. Now, this is clearly, that was a beginning. FDA can actually only do so many meetings. 24 meetings, took a lot of work to get these 24 meetings together. Desiree, I'm sure it took a lot of work to put this meeting together. And so if you can imagine, but we have about 1,000 diseases we need these kind of meetings for. So we obviously can't get there with FDA-led meetings alone. And so this has led us to the next step, which is a meeting like this today. The externally led patient-focused development meetings, where you, the patients, are empowered and able to put together your meeting and invite us to come and listen. This allows us to do many more meetings than we possibly could if it were just through FDA alone. As we look forward into the future, we're looking at how can we also use this to develop better patient-reported outcome measures that will get the kind of science of this patient input to develop those kind of even better outputs from our clinical trials that will really tell us more about what a drug's going to do for you or not. And we also want to look and see, are there other methods? Are there survey-type methods that might allow us to really rapidly get out there using the kind of methodologies that assure that there's not bias in the way surveys are done, there's not, that there's adequate sort of representation of the broad patient populations that are present at that time. Teresa and I have talked about this, and you know, I think the surveys, I think, could be a great way for us to, you know, get at hundreds more diseases and the patient input, but it never replace a day like today, a day where there's face-to-face contact, a day where you actually have the ability to sense the true passion and emotion of what patients are going through in the patient experience with that disease. So I don't want to use up all my time or go beyond the time that I have at this point, but I do want to just reiterate to all of you that we think that this is a very important effort. We are listening, and I assure you it will make a difference. Thank you very much.
Dr. Herbert Bonkovsky, who is a long-standing and porphyria expert, will be speaking on the overview of the disease itself.
Good morning, everybody. I know many of you. It's good to see you, and thanks for coming. I just have a few minutes to try to go over some of the sort of just the high points of clinical features of the acute porphyrias. These are my disclosures. I've had some support over the years from the NIH and been a consultant. I'm not on any speakers bureaus. Now, the porphyrias, as I think all of you actually know already, are disorders of normal porphyrin and heme synthesis. They're mostly inherited, but they also are affected, importantly, by a variety of other factors, such as drugs, nutrition, alcohol, probably other genetic variations outside the heme pathway. And the major clinical features are acute neurovisceral attacks, but then also, unfortunately, too often, chronic, apparently neuropathic pain in the acute porphyrias. And then in another group that we don't really have time to talk about today, cutaneous photosensitivity in the cutaneous porphyrias. And it now appears most likely that the symptoms of acute porphyrias and some of the pathology and so on are mainly due to ALA. That's not absolutely established, but there's growing evidence to support that, and I don't have time to go into all of it today. In terms of the photosensitivity and the skin manifestations, those are clearly due to porphyrins that can lead to activation and damage of the skin. Well, here's the obligate pathway slide. Many of you are familiar with this. I'm not going to go over it all in detail, but this is the heme synthesis pathway in us as mammals, and it starts with the rate-controlling enzyme called ALA synthase, delta-aminolevulinic acid synthase, which condenses glycine and succinyl-CoA to form ALA, and then down the pathway to porphobilinogen, which is the first monopyrrole of the pathway, then to a tetrapyrrole, so 4 of these strung together, hydroxymethylbilane, and on down to eventually protoporphyrin, which under normal circumstances is converted primarily to heme by the enzyme ferrochelatase. And we're really only going to be talking today about a very rare disease, ALA deficient porphyria, acute intermittent porphyria, the major one that we see among the acute porphyrias, hereditary coproporphyria, and variegate porphyria. So the hepatic porphyrias are broken into acute or inducible. Inducible because there can be uncontrolled induction of hepatic ALA synthase 1, which is the hallmark and very important for pathogenesis of this disease, or this group of diseases. And so these acute inducible porphyrias are the four I just mentioned. Fortunately, ALA dehydratase deficiency porphyria is very rare, and we won't really say more about that probably this morning. The chronic hepatic porphyrias, actually quite common, porphyria cutaneous tarda, and then the erythropoietic porphyrias, again, that we don't have time to really talk about. Now, the major clinical features are, in the acute porphyrias, these attacks of neurovisceral pain with dysfunction of neurons that can be anywhere in the nervous system. It can be peripheral, it can be central, delirium, coma, seizures, when severe, lead, as you heard from Desiree, to total paralysis. And unfortunately, still occasional fatality. So it can be very severe. But there are also often, particularly in people that have repeated attacks of disease, chronic ongoing symptoms, even when they're apparently not having acute attacks. And we don't actually understand all those chronic symptoms too well. I don't really have time to talk more about the cutaneous porphyrias today. But here again is the pathway shown in a different way. So here's ALA, PBG, and so on. And these are the sites of the key defects for ALA dehydratase deficiency. As you would expect, the main accumulating intermediate, when there's severe reduction of this and a lifting of this normal repression of ALA synthase, a massive overproduction of ALA. In AIP, the defect is here, and there's both a big increase in porphobilinogen and in ALA. And in the case of copragen oxidase, hereditary coproporphyria, also an increase in coproporphyrin, and in variegate porphyria, also an increase in protoporphyrin and so-called harderoporphyrin. Now, a key factor is that there's a small but critical regulatory heme pool. So here again is the pathway. Here is this heme pool, and we now know that it normally represses the formation of ALA. It does so in a variety of ways, mainly by increasing the degradation of the message for ALA synthase, but also by blocking the uptake of this enzyme, which is active in mitochondria, into the mitochondria. In addition, not shown on this slide, there is an effective heme within mitochondria to enhance the breakdown of this enzyme. And so heme normally represses the overproduction, but when there's a deficiency in one of these steps in the pathway, either acquired or usually inherited, this regulatory heme pool may be deficient, leading then to this uncontrolled massive induction of hepatic ALA synthase. Now, heme is used mainly, as shown by this arrow, for the formation of a group of cytochromes called cytochromes P450. There are a number of other cytochromes, mitochondrial, etc., but quantitatively, it's the P450s that use most of the heme made by the liver cell. And so things that are potent inducers of P450, such as barbiturates, hydantoins, a number of drugs that are strongly contraindicated in acute porphyrias, may lead to some depletion of this regulatory heme pool and to this overinduction. Now, it turns out that many of these, probably most of these, actually also directly induce the formation of hepatic ALA synthase. Fortunately, heme from the outside is able to get into the liver cells pretty well, even when bound to albumin, and to replete this heme pool. And of course, that's the basis for the use of heme as therapy, as the first orphan drug. I think still today, now 45 years later after we first developed this, it remains the treatment of choice. We may have some new exciting treatments, and Dr. Desnik is going to talk about those. The overall prevalence of acute intermittent porphyria in terms of symptomatic disease depends somewhat on the country. There are strong founder effects, so in northern Sweden there are a lot of patients with AIP. As you can see, in the US, sort of symptomatic disease about 2 to 5 per 100,000, but the prevalence of genetic defects is actually much higher, estimated around 65 per 100,000. So it implies that there's incomplete penetrance. And of course, fortunately, many patients with these genetic defects don't suffer all of these severe effects. Only a relatively small minority, we think, do. But of course, for those, many of you in this room that have these, it can be truly devastating disease. And as I've already said, it's dysfunction of neurons, sometimes death of neurons. There are overlapping clinical syndromes, but the classic is the acute attack with severe pain crises and systemic arterial hypertension, tachycardia, sweating, and so on. There can be peripheral motor and sensory neuropathies that can progress to global dysfunction of both the peripheral and the central nervous system. And then I've already talked about the fact that unfortunately too many patients develop subacute or chronic pain syndromes, paresthesias, anxiety, depression, trouble concentrating, trouble sleeping, and the like. Seizures occur in about 20% of people, and they can be a source of real problems because most of the commonly used anticonvulsants, somebody comes to the ER, they're seizing, first thing you do is you give them Dilantin, and all hell breaks loose in patients with porphyria who are given Dilantin or barbiturates. Now, if one looks at patients sick enough to need to be hospitalized, what are the key and cardinal symptoms? Well, abdominal pain, as you can see, is by far number one, but constipation is frequent, nausea and vomiting are frequent, and that, of course, makes things worse because people go into negative energy and nitrogen balance, and that leads to a positive feedback loop. In terms of the signs, so this is things like blood pressure, pulse rate, and so on. As you can see, the great majority of people that have these severe enough attacks to need to go to the emergency room have some degree of tachycardia. They have dark urine, although it's often missed because people don't ask. A variety of other defects that I don't have time to go into detail now. I've already mentioned some of the precipitating factors. We know that alcohol, especially excess amounts of alcohol, can be very bad and should be avoided. Estrogens, sulfonamides, these drugs that induce the P450s. Unfortunately, some women, and this is mainly a symptomatic disease of women, about 80% of patients with severe attacks are women, during their childbearing years. So the luteal phase of the menstrual cycle, second half of the menstrual cycle. It can be worse in pregnancy and especially in the postpartum period. We've seen several patients now who first developed symptoms after they underwent gastric bypass as treatment for obesity. So the glucose effect is still a very real effect, and fasting and crash diets can lead to increased symptoms. In terms of the early diagnosis, it's important for us as physicians and healthcare providers to consider the diagnosis in all patients, especially women aged about 18 to 45 or 50, and especially with recurrent abdominal pain, perhaps with muscle weakness, hyponatremia, dark or reddish urine. And it's important, very important, to establish the diagnosis clearly. This is best done with a qualitative test for porphobilinogen in a random urine. It doesn't have to be a 24-hour urine. Unfortunately, the rapid tests for this are no longer readily available, which is actually a fairly major unmet need currently. Now, we have additional new data thanks to the EXPLORE study, landmark study done by Alnylam, and you'll hear more about Alnylam. This is about natural history of acute patients, or patients with recurrent attacks. It was an observational study, as you can see, done on 112 patients across 13 countries. And I just want to direct your attention especially here. More than 70% had attacks requiring heme or treatment. More than 65% experienced chronic symptoms between attacks. 4.6 hospital stays per year, ranging from 1 to 60 days. So a severe disease burden, for sure. On-study attack numbers and treatments, 95 patients had 404 attacks. They were treated mainly in healthcare facilities, both in the EU and the US, as you can see. Some were on current heme prophylaxis. Those that were seemed to have fewer attacks, suggesting that prophylactic heme, at least in many patients, is beneficial. And of course, the treatments include heme, often narcotics, about 50% of the time, high carbohydrate diet, and so on. The effect on quality of life, as many patients here will attest, can be severe and very negative. So among 100 patients in the EXPLORE study, moderate to severe pain in 39%, anxiety and depression in 28%, limitations in activity in 25%, and overall the sort of severity of disease was similar to what one sees in diabetes, heart disease, or hereditary angioedema. The costs are enormous, both in terms of lost productivity and direct costs of healthcare and management. So in summary, it's a worldwide problem. There's low penetrance, but devastating for patients who have it. Induction of ALA synthase is the key feature. Currently, intravenous heme, dextrose, analgesics, avoidance of precipitants, but new therapy, especially self-administration early in attacks, represent a major unmet need. And I thank you very much for your attention, and I guess the questions may come during a later time. Thank you.
I don't know how to turn it on. Okay. Dr. Carl Anderson at the University of Texas Medical Branch will be talking about our current therapies.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be speaking to this wonderful group this morning. Let me advance the slides here. This is my disclosures. I also have some grant support from NIH and FDA orphan products, and I will be discussing some off-label uses. So my purpose is to discuss the treatment and prevention of acute porphyrias in terms of what's currently available, and also what are some of the major unmet needs. In my opinion, I mean that this meeting is mostly about what patients think are the unmet needs, and we'll hear more about that later. So the treatments are available. We have specific therapies, which, as Dr. Bankowski said, involve repression of hepatic ALA synthase, and these include hemin and glucose. Symptomatic and supportive therapies are very important because patients with acute attacks are severely ill. They require opioids for control of pain, and medications for nausea, IV fluids, and electrolytes for major complications of the attack. Also, there are some preventive therapies, including GnRH analogs, and also hemin can be used for prevention of attacks. And these are all treatments that are available, but as we'll discuss, they still require some additional research and product development to optimize their uses. So the specific therapies, as Dr. Bankowski mentioned, they repress ALA synthase, and they ameliorate the symptoms of the attacks. Currently we recommend that all attacks, except very mild attacks, be treated with hemin. Loading is recommended only for mild attacks. And then symptomatic and supportive therapy are very important. Hemin is given as a single intravenous dose daily at 3 to 4 milligrams per kilogram with a maximum of one vial, or 313 milligrams. The duration of it for treating an attack is the standard course is for 4 days, but longer treatment is used in severe attacks. And the duration of action of hemin is fairly short, because hemin is taken up readily in the liver and reconstitutes the heme pool, regulatory heme pool, but it's rapidly degraded in the liver by heme oxygenase. And this shows a response to hemin in 5 patients who were treated for 4 days, as you can see by the arrows, and you get a marked drop in porphobilinogen. So it's clear there's a strong biochemical effect when you give hemin intravenously. So hemin, there are 2 products available in the world. One is panhematin, which is available in the U.S., and the generic name for both is hemin for injection, or for normal saying it's human hemin. And panhematin is lyophilized hematin, which means it's the heme in the hydroxy form, and it's freeze-dried basically to be reconstituted with sterile water. And hemarginate is a concentrated solution of heme with albumin, which provides some stability. These appear to be equally effective because when they're infused intravenously, they both bind to albumin and essentially circulate as heme albumin. Stability is an important issue, because these can degrade before they're infused, and the degradation products can cause some side effects. Therefore, both products actually are often reconstituted with albumin. So the panhematin has been available since 1983. The recommendation that most of us have is that it should be reconstituted with albumin rather than sterile water. But this is an off-label recommendation and not approved by the FDA. Hemarginate is available in Europe and South Africa. It is more stable. It has less effects on veins and also on coagulation. But in clinical practice in Europe, as more and more people are adding albumin to enhance stability. So hemin is considered the most effective treatment for acute attacks. I think everybody agrees with that. However, the evidence is not as good as we would like. In this era of evidence-based medicine, it's been rated as grade 1C. Grade 1 means it's highly recommended, and C is it means that there haven't been good clinical trials to support the recommendation. And for example, in UpToDate, which is an online textbook, it basically says this, that prospective randomized clinical trials are lacking at present. So more studies are needed to increase the quality of evidence of this drug, which is our main drug. And we are conducting randomized controlled trials now to try to make the evidence of higher quality, and we're seeking patients for that. Hemin is also used for prevention. It's widely used in the U.S. It also has a grade 1C recommendation, and there's a study underway also to better the evidence for prevention. So our current recommendations, on all of us in the field really, is that panhematin should be started as soon as possible for an acute attack. Glucose should only be used for mild attacks. It's safe to use in pregnancy, and it should be, most people feel it should be reconstituted with albumin. However, the approved indications for panhematin at present are narrow. It's really only approved for women with cyclic attacks. and it's instructed that a trial of intravenous glucose should precede using panhematin, and pregnancy is an exclusion. So we need more data to try to modify these approved indications. Now, approved indications don't restrict how physicians use a drug. So once a drug is approved, the FDA, it doesn't regulate how it's used, and physicians can use it any way they want. However, physicians are often uncomfortable, and often hospitals and institutions are uncomfortable about off-label and use of drugs. So it is a problem. And more and more insurers are deciding not to pay for indications that are not approved by the FDA. So we do need more studies with Heman, even though it is currently available. In terms of unmet needs, we definitely need new drugs, and it's exciting that there are a number of companies that are developing new drugs for acute porphyrias. We need them both for treatment and for prevention. The fact we only have one drug is a problem because if you look at other metabolic diseases such as diabetes, for example, there are multiple treatment options available. And as I've mentioned, Heman needs more studies. And we'll need Heman long-term, I think, even if new drugs are eventually approved by the FDA. So we need to improve the quality of the evidence for use of Heman. So what should the priorities be? We need to develop and study and get approval for new treatments. That's certainly needed. We need to increase the quality of the evidence for existing treatments, and especially Heman. We need to better understand the natural history. As Dr. Bonkowski was saying, we've thought of acute intermittent porphyria as a disease where people have these attacks, but in between they're perfectly well, which is true for some patients, but over time it appears that chronic symptoms become more and more prevalent. And many patients are on long-term narcotic treatment, and we don't really understand that. And so we definitely need more natural history studies, and Alnylam has really made a contribution by doing an important natural history study. We need to know the natural history better so we can know when these different drugs we're going to have available are most valuable. We also need to more studies. The natural history studies will contribute to understanding supportive treatment, particularly pain control. Pain control and availability of drugs for controlling pain is a big issue for many patients. It is for other diseases with chronic pain. And we need to understand and be supportive of that also. And I'd be happy to, we're going to answer questions later? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dr. Robert Desnick from Mount Sinai will be speaking on therapeutics and development.
Well, thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here today. And what I'd like to do during this talk is to discuss with you therapeutics and development so that the patients get an overview of what the current status is in treating the acute porphyrias. These are my relevant conflicts. So what I'm going to talk about is heme replacement, a little bit more about panhematin because there is an update. It is the only approved treatment we have, and it's very important to these patients. A more dramatic approach, which has been done in a couple patients in America, one at Mount Sinai, and I'll tell you a little bit about liver transplantation. There have been some attempts at gene therapy, both in the mouse and in humans, and we'll bring that up to date. And then finally, I want to talk about the RNA interference, a more molecular-based therapy that's in clinical trials now. So let's begin with heme replacement, and let's just point out, as we heard before, the pathway where you start out with this crucial enzyme. Some people call it ALAS1 or ALAS1, but it is the enzyme that the amount of heme in the liver, in that heme pool, controls. And in most people, normal people, you keep this at a homeostatic level, and then you percolate down through the 8 enzymes to heme. And that's what happens in the liver, where you're making all the different compounds and enzymes that Dr. Bonkowski outlined. But in patients who have acute porphyric attacks, what happens is heme is depleted, and it turns on the synthesis at the genetic level of ALAS1. So you end up making a ton of ALA and PBG, and because in acute intermittent porphyria you only have half normal enzyme levels, they accumulate. And they're what we believe the neurotoxic elements that cause the neurovisceral disease. So Herb didn't show it, but this is the original report back in '71 showing that if you gave heme, you could reduce the PBG and the ALA, and this was the signal that this really worked and might be therapeutic. And we now know that that is definitely true. It's the first orphan drug, as you heard. It's the only drug currently approved for the treatment, and it's clinically effective, even though we would love to have more clinical studies. As Dr. Anderson pointed out, the patients in this room are testimony to how effective it works, and I think that's important to understand. In the early days of approval, many drugs were approved based on observational studies. They didn't have the rigor we have today, and that's true for certain inborn errors as well. So there is a new panhematin, and I've been asked to say a few words about it because you're going to hear more and more about this. So the FDA recently approved Recordati Rare Diseases, who produces a panhematin, with a supplemental BLA, or biologic license application, for a new dosage of its hematin. And what they did was it's the first new hematin-based product. You know, the predecessor was '83, so this product is going to come out in 2017 in July. And at launch, they plan to enhance their patient assistance program to include a new copay assistance for patients. I'm sure you'll all appreciate that. So this new preparation of panhematin comes in a vial with 350 instead of the old 313 milligrams dose. And there are a number of patients who will be eligible for 1 vial per infusion at the recommended dose. Often it's treated at too low a dose, and we want to make sure patients get 3 to 4 milligrams per kilogram. The new vial will be beneficial, will benefit from the review. They looked at the clinical experience over the last 30 plus years, and there have been significant label changes, including eliminating the black box, which made many doctors, uptight about whether to administer it. They revised the preparation and administration instructions. They have an introduction, they're introducing clinical trials and experience section. I think we'll all appreciate the response of the company to some of our expert suggestions. So this vial will be offered at the same price as a previous vial, so you get more bang for the buck. Okay. Liver transplantation. Now this is a very dramatic method that is for patients who are unresponsive to the typical medical treatment of hematin. And in '04, in Britain, there was a 19-year-old woman who had 37 attacks over 29 months. She didn't respond well to the treatment. The transplant was performed, and in the 12 years since then, she has had no attacks. And what happened is her PBG and ALA almost in 24 hours went to normal. In the United States, we performed and published the first U.S. transplant. This woman had severe recurrent attacks for 11 years. She was hospitalized for 13 months with pain management prior to transplantation. That's a long time at Mount Sinai. And what happened is her ALA and PBG following transplant normalized in 24 hours. We kept the resident up all night getting those data. So it works, and it proved that the liver was the focus of the acute attacks. And I think what we learned from that is this is a very, very dramatic approach, and we hope that there are new therapies. And one of the therapies that we hope would work was gene therapy. And this is a slide that I made about 20 years ago when gene therapy first became, the rage. And what you see is the molecular surgeon here who wields the molecular scalpel, and he can go in and fix in each cell the DNA and fix the genetic defect, and voila, it's not a treatment, it's a cure. Well, the whole challenge is to get the normal gene into the cell nucleus where the DNA is, and it turns out that viruses normally do that. So by using some modern genetic engineering, you can put the corrective gene into the virus, and it will piggyback into the nucleus of the crucial cells where the pathology is, and that we know is the hepatocyte, and deliver and make the normal enzyme. Okay, and there have been, and this is the whole idea, we're using the AAV virus, and the idea is to take the gene and put it in, and this is the gene that people with AIP have only half normal levels. So what we did is we've used the mouse to study the feasibility and do proof of concept. These mice have ALA and PBG increased. They develop a progressive axon loss, and they can be induced with the usual drugs to have a biochemical attack. We don't know that the mouse is suffering like patients, but they do have a biochemical attack. And there have been studies in my lab by Yasuda and in Spain by another group that ultimately went into clinical trials. And basically, what we did in the mouse was we injected the enzyme gene into the mice, and we saw that we could increase the enzyme deficient in AIP more than 1.5 times normal. And when we challenged it with phenobarb, we saw no increase in urinary ALA or PBG, and it prevented the biochemical attack. And that was the first indication that gene therapy may work. I'm not going to go through the data, but let me just say that the Spanish group working with a company called Unicure did a study of 8 patients. And they did a phase 1 open-label, liver-directed gene therapy clinical trial in acute intermittent porphyria. And they had 8 patients with recurrent attacks who got increasing doses of the virus, bringing more and more of the normal gene in to the liver. Although the therapy was safe, in other words, the patients did just fine, there was no biochemical improvement, and 6 of the patients that received the highest doses did not decrease the frequency of their attack. And in the Journal of Hepatology that it was published in, there was an editorial which basically said, it's safe, but is it effective? And I think we all know now, over the period of time since it was done and reported at the porphyria meetings in Europe, that it didn't have any effect. So we'll see what happens in the future. This is still a viable approach. This is just showing some of the data from that paper. It didn't really affect the ALA or PBG, the crucial compounds that need to be treated. So let me turn to the new player on the stage because this is quite encouraging. This is called RNA interference or RNAi therapy. And this, again, remember the critical enzyme here is AOAS1. And if we could deplete the amount that accumulates during an acute attack, we would have a very effective treatment. And if that treatment was prolonged, it would be preventative, particularly for those individuals who have recurrent attacks. So let me just say, RNA interference, and I don't want to get into biology 301 or whatever it might be, but it's a gene silencing approach. It was a breakthrough discovery in biology. It got the Nobel Prize in 2006. And the most important thing to know is it's a natural biologic process in which small RNA molecules, which we can, well, let me just say, in which small RNA molecules regulate, and that's like turn up, down, or off gene expression. So how much of the enzyme is made. And it's sort of like a rheostat. You can deplete it, you can turn it up, you can turn it down, depending on how much of the RNA molecule you give. I'm not going to go through the mechanism, but it's used in laboratories experimentally to knock out a particular gene if we want to study gene expression in the laboratory, and it can be applied to human conditions where genes are pathologically overexpressed and overproduce specific proteins and their products. And indeed, that is the case with acute intermittent porphyrias and the other two porphyrias, where you get very high levels, overexpression of AOAS1. And so you can introduce specific RNAs that are designed to knock down that particular enzyme RNA. And that, I won't go into the detail, but that's the logic that's used. And here's sort of the simplified version where normally you have a lot of this enzyme protein in an acute attack, and you overproduce AOA and PBG, and you get the symptoms. Now, if you add the sRNA, the RNAi, that's specific for the synthesis of AOAS1, the enzyme, and you knock down the RNA so you don't make as much enzyme, which is shown here, then you get a decrease in the AOA and PBG. And that's what I'm going to show you in a couple of the phase 1 clinical trial slides. Now, what's interesting about this is you don't need a virus. You simply take a small sugar called galactosamine, you hook it on to the RNA, and you can give it subcutaneously. So it's kind of neat. You could do it at home. And the phase 1 clinical trials have included a part A, where you simply gave a single ascending dose, and a part B, where you gave a multiple ascending dose, and these doses are kind of a dose ranging study. And then there's a part C, and I'll mention a little bit of data from that because that turns out to be very, very interesting. What you see here is, okay, what you see here, it's still saying 5 here. Okay. The trap door is about to open.
Yes.
But I think it's important to see this. This is the single ascending dose, and here's patients who got placebo, so that's their AOA, that's their PBG, here's their AOA, and you can see with increasing dose, and there's 5 different doses here, it comes down, and it proved to be safe and well tolerated. And this is a study that was done in the Part C results, where they did a run-in, and you're looking at the AOA and PBG of this patient, and then with treatment, this patient got placebo. There was no effect on the AOA or PBG. But quickly, if you look here, here's the AOA and PBG elevated, and with treatment coming down. Another patient, same story. And that sort of highlights some of the effects of this potential new treatment. So I'm going to stop there. I only suggest that if you're not involved in our Porphyrias Consortium, where we're doing research, very important to get involved. There are 6 sites, and each of the physicians here is involved in one of those sites. Thank you very much.
If our panel can come up if you need any help getting up here, we'll be glad to help you. I also want to welcome the people on webcast. I think we have 50-something or more people on our webcast this morning. So your questions will be coming through, and we appreciate it. Do we need any help here? The first panel will be discussing the clinical manifestations of the disease, effects on daily life and quality of life, and family impact. Our first speaker will be Dr. Lisa Kerberg, whose certainly life has been changed upside down from AIP.
Okay. Hello, my name's Lisa Kerberg, and I'm 42 years old. I have acute intermittent porphyria. I'm mostly just going to kind of describe what it's been like since I became very sick with this disease, and how much it's completely devastated my life. I was diagnosed in 2013 at the age of 39. I'm a physician, and you know, I was always a very driven, self-motivated person with so many goals in life, and I had it all planned out, and always grew up thinking I could just, if I worked as hard as I could, and you know, just very regimented, and you know, life just turns out great when you do that, until I got seriously ill in September 2013 and was unable to continue practicing. I'm family practice trained, and after residency I worked in private practice for a few years. Then I went on to work for the Department of Veterans Affairs, and I specifically did pain management in an outpatient primary care setting. I loved my job. I really cared about what I did, and was very happy about implementing new changes in the VA as far as managing the pain of the veterans. Now, as far as my health situation, looking back now, my first attack was in my teenage years. And at some point, I started to have monthly attacks that were associated with my menses. It'd be the week before, but I was undiagnosed at this point. So I, as a physician, thought my symptoms were just menstrual related. You know, I knew the pain was bad. I would just take a lot of Aleve, a lot of Tylenol, and just keep on going. And then it was a few months before September 2013 when I was diagnosed. I started getting more and more sick. The attacks started coming more and more frequent. And then I had a very severe attack that no longer could I just keep ignoring this at home, and I ended up in the emergency room, and then ended up admitted to the hospital, and fortunately eventually diagnosed during that hospital admission with acute intermittent porphyria, and then treatment began. And I thought that after I got this treatment and we made this diagnosis, and what a relief, now we know, and I can just go back to my life now, and that's not what happened. I spent close to 3 months almost continuously for the first 3 months hospitalized in excruciating pain. And then when I was able to be discharged from the hospital, I continued to have attacks that were not just frequent, back-to-back and overlapping attacks since 2013. During that time, there was no intermittent about it. There was not a day where I got well and could go back to work. And I kept waiting for that day, and it took a while for me to face the reality that my career I'd worked so hard for was over because I was too sick to get back to my job. And I mean, that's okay. I've dealt with that now. But the other part about it is I grieve the loss of my career, everything I'd worked for. But also, I have 2 little children. And so my children have, for the last 3 years, have watched me just sick all the time, in pain, vomiting, such severe muscle weakness that, you know, for weeks at a time, I won't be able to go up and down the stairs in my house, and I'll just sleep on the couch. And I'll have all these bags lined up for the vomiting. And, you know, to have my 10-year-old daughter bringing me little bags. Mommy, you need another bag? And rubbing my back. And I'm supposed to be the one doing that with my kids, you know. Or my son has started playing basketball, and, you know, all he wants is for me to go watch his basketball game. And so many times I miss that. Even though I'm on disability now and can't work, it's not that I'm busy with my career. That would have been the thing most people would think would keep me from his games. Sometimes I'm too sick to even leave the house, sometimes weeks at a time. Sometimes I would go weeks at a time where I can't even get upstairs. So it's more than just, you know, an attack of a little bit of pain and whatever. It's completely debilitating. And the kind of pain I'm talking about is, I mean, I've had 2 children, and this pain is just not even comparable to anything. It's completely out of this world pain. Only opioids even put a dent in this pain. And I mean, it's just unimaginable. I think the pain is probably the worst part of it, but the muscle weakness is also just so intense. And the muscle, it feels like I'm wearing a 500-pound lead suit or something. You know, I'll go weeks where I can't even lift my arms above my shoulders or get up out of a chair without assistance. Or, I mean, it's just the disease is just completely debilitating. So it's not only, it's just destroyed my life. I've lost my career, my children. I don't know what harm this is doing, watching me sick all the time, missing their events, just missing life. And I can tell you now, so even with the available treatments that I had early on in this, there was nothing to prevent these attacks. They just continued to come back to back, attacks. I have a very good palliative care physician who manages this. Fortunately for that, I've kept my admissions, hospital admissions down, because he's very understanding and helps me, treat the pain and these symptoms, so that hopefully, I don't just live in a hospital. I can just do this at home. But I'll tell you that my life, honestly, and I love life. I'm not depressed. I have always loved life. I'm a very self-motivated, driven individual with goals. There's so many things I still want to do in life. This disease has prevented me from being able to do those things. And the condition that I've been in like this is not something that anybody could live that way for any length of time. It's not possible. It's not tolerable. The pain's not tolerable. So I am very eager and happy that there's new treatments coming and to be a part of clinical trials. Any chance for me to get better, sign me up. Honestly, if someone were to tell me, here's a new treatment for porphyria, there's a 50% chance it will make you 70% well, and a 50% chance you'll die if you take it, there would be no hesitation. Give me that medication. That's the risk I'm willing to take. I would risk death to get better, and that's not because that's real. That's real. It's realistic. Somebody can't live the way I'm living right now. It's like hell on earth. It's completely the worst thing ever. So there is really and truly no risk that anyone could tell me that I wouldn't sign up for a trial or try a new treatment. Not one, you can't, nothing. Because I can't imagine anything worse than what I'm experiencing now.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thanks.
Very much.
Oh,
Dr. Herbert.
there's my picture.
Your before and after.
You see, yeah, I forgot there's a picture.
The before and the after.
Okay.
Am I going next?
Yes.
Okay.
The order you're sitting. Helen, would you like to,
Yes, I'll go
Helen
next.
McKinstry?
Hi, my name is Heather McKinstry.
Heather, excuse me.
Yes. I am 31 years old, and I have acute intermittent porphyria. I was diagnosed when I was 16 with my first attack because we had a family history. So I got kind of lucky in that regard, even though the doctor at the time refused to do the treatment because he said, there's no way that I have this, it's too rare, even with a family history. I had a seizure and I was transferred to a larger hospital, and there was a specialist there, and he was actually the one that did the diagnosis. So the first 2 years after my attack started, I had hospitalized attacks 1 to 2 times every month, and they lasted from 1 week to the longest was 6 weeks. I tried like every option that I could to make the attack stop. I changed my lifestyle, I changed my diet, I drank this stuff called Polycose regularly. It's like super thick and disgustingly sweet. It was horrible. I did Lupron and other hormones or other drugs to suppress my hormones, and none of that made any difference. I still had attacks regularly. I finally tried weekly infusions of the panhematin, and that helped to prevent the number of hospitalized attacks, but I still had between 3 and 8 every single year. I received weekly infusions for over 12 years, and over the years, my health continued to decline. I struggled daily with severe abdominal pain, nausea, an inability to think clearly. I was extremely irritable. I had extreme fatigue and weakness, and I had a burning sensation of my skin. So if anyone were to touch me, it just felt like my skin was burning. I have a sensitivity to sounds, smells, and lights, and I've had countless IVs in my arms, my hands, my fingers. I've had PICC lines, central lines, and I had 5 ports. And even today, it's still hard to get my blood drawn. Doctors have treated me like I was a drug seeker, like I had mental health issues, or that I was trying to escape a bad childhood at home. I've had countless doctors try to bully me, saying that I did not even look sick. There were several, 6 to be exact, renowned experts from all over the world and country involved in my care. I was extremely persistent in trying to improve my health. I really want to reiterate how every day was a challenge. My quality of life was extremely poor. I had to quit several jobs, and for years I struggled emotionally, physically, and financially. I even considered suicide several times because I was just so hopeless. I felt like there was no other treatment options, and I could not keep living the way that I was. About 4 years ago, doctors recommended a liver transplant. They warned me it was a very difficult procedure and not something to be pursued lightly. And as soon as he said it, that he was considering doing it, I said yes. Like right there, right then. And he was like, "Are you sure you don't want to think about this?" And I was like, "Definitely not. If it will help, I want to do it." I just couldn't keep living the way that I was. And I received my liver transplant on October 31st, 2015. And they were right. It was extremely difficult. The surgery itself and the 6 months afterwards were full of complications. I had internal bleeding and I got readmitted to the hospital. But I'm extremely happy that I did it. I know that it was a drastic procedure and not everyone can do it, but for me, it made a huge difference. I have been able to live for the first time in my adult life without any symptoms whatsoever. I know that many people do not have the energy or the ability to advocate for their own care the way that I did. I saw doctors everywhere. I called people all the time. And that is really rare with somebody who is just tired all the time, and I just refused to give up. I pushed through. So I want to ask today for better and more treatment options for those that have frequent attacks and who suffer symptoms daily. Thank you for listening to my story.
Hi, my name's Terry Witter, and at age 21, we had no idea that porphyria was lurking in our family tree, and it was discovered that I needed to have surgery. The anesthetic was a barbiturate. I developed staph infection and then was given sulfa to clear it up. 3 major triggers within 24 hours. This was in May of 1979. By July, I still hadn't gotten better, so our family physician sent me up to Mayo Clinic. by my 22nd birthday, which was August 28th, on that day, I got my diagnosis of AIP. And the doctor was kind of grave about giving me the diagnosis, but I jumped for joy because at least now I had a name and I knew I could start looking. None of the doctors at home knew anything about how to treat it. So my mom and I spent hour after hour in the university and the hospital libraries trying to find information that we could share with our doctors in hopes of getting treatment for it. And for the first 5 years, I spent 90% of my time in the hospital. And each month, the AIP was set off by female hormone fluctuation. And at the end of that 5 years, we didn't have home health in our hometown yet. So I was moved to a nursing home. And I was the youngest resident at age 27. The years in the hospital and the nursing home put an abrupt end to my social life, to pursuing my career, to travel, just about anything that anybody expects to do in their lifetime. Didn't get married, didn't have children. My life was porphyria and the hospital. I finally was able to leave the nursing home at age 31 and was moved to another nursing home that had apartments attached to it. It wasn't assisted living. It was just an apartment on the nursing home. And I was able to live on my own for a while there. Along the way, I decided that I was going to get involved in research as much as possible. If it didn't help me, maybe it would help somebody else. So I got involved in a genetic project at Mayo's, and then I tried the panhematin project, and that's where I learned that I couldn't take panhematin. A little later on, I was involved with the Lupron or LHRH project and the longitudinal study, and that's just a few. I've been in 7 different projects. Now, at age 60, my life is not very much different due to constant attacks. I live with my parents and don't do much traveling except coming here to help tell the story of what porphyria life is all about. In conclusion, porphyria life is one of indescribable isolation, pain that's not compatible to life, and is even harder to control now that the CDC has changed their regulations. For me, the pain feels very much like walking around with a belly full of broken glass, or someone taking a pop bottle, breaking the end of it off, and sitting there and shoving it in. It's very sharp, and it doesn't quit. I also have rapid pulse nausea, brain fog, numbness in the hands and feet, depression, insomnia, and even the effect of bullying by doctors, especially the ones that don't even know how to spell porphyria, let alone treat it. my social life is still basically the same, non-existent, and I still can't be depended on to work. So at this point, I feel we desperately need more research, more education of doctors, and new and improved treatments for those of us who suffer.
Thank you, Terry. Michael Boone.
My name is Michael Boone. I'm 41 years old. I was diagnosed with AIP in October of 2008 after 8 years of trying to find answers. Even after getting diagnosed, I had a hard time just getting treatment. The first doctor we spoke to, who was a specialist, was a hepatologist. He said that despite my family history of my grandmother dying from AIP, as well as her brother, my mother was diagnosed with AIP in the mid-90s. Despite all that, despite the fact that I have 2 tests in 7 days come out very positive, I could not possibly have AIP. It was too rare. They made a mistake in the lab. So I went to another doctor. This other doctor didn't dispute that I had AIP, but his treatment plan was to give me all the Dilaudid I wanted or needed, and then for me to drink a gallon of Gatorade diluted by 50% every day. That was it. That's all he was going to do for me. He refused to give me panhematin. Then he prescribed me a drug that was dangerous for us to have and made me much worse. So I went to a different doctor, got a hematologist this time who knew what he was doing. I asked him right away for the panhematin. Immediately he put me on it. I was also on D10 and normal saline twice a week after that. So for the next 5-6 years, that was how my treatment route went, except that I had problems getting my pain treated. They sent me to a pain treatment center, which by the way was 100 miles from where I live, so it was a 200-mile round trip to get there, and all they wanted to do was give me 10 pills at a time, and then the plan was to wean me off of it, because after all, I couldn't have chronic pain. You're not that sick. So my primary care doctor just ended up taking over treating my pain, and that went on for 5 years before I finally was referred over to palliative care, and they were the ones really that did the research into it and were able to get a better handle on the pain. If you can call it a better handle, I guess. My attacks, I have at least 2 a month. Sometimes you can't really tell the difference between them. I'm not certain if it's just one long attack or, if I'm getting a slight break because the pain is less between them. In 2010, I lost an uncle to cancer, and I have to be honest with you, I am jealous of the people that have cancer because they will have an end. They're either going to get better or they're going to die. And we don't get that. We get to just sit here and linger in hell. If it wasn't for my wife, I'd be dead now. The resources, because she works at the hospital where I'm treated, the resources that she pulled there really is what eventually saved my life. I'm now involved in research with the Alnylam drug trial, so I am thankful for that, for the Porphyria Foundation getting me in connection with the various different research projects that are going on. So if this, for some reason, this Alnylam drug thing doesn't work, then I'm probably going to look into transplant because I can't live like this anymore. Thank you.
McEwen?
Good morning. My name is Colin McEwen, and I, like many other people in this room, am on the market for a new liver. So if you guys have any leads, please let us know. When I was 10 years old, I hopped in the car with my grandfather to go grab pizza and was struck head-on by a Camaro going 50 miles an hour at the point of impact. I suffered head trauma and had emergency surgery to repair the extensive damage to my abdomen. But I was very fortunate. A few months later, I was back to being an active kid. 20 years later, I was engaged and knee-deep in a career for local and national nonprofits. I began having seizures, bouts of horrific and indescribable abdominal pain, the type of pain that made the car wreck experience seem like a tickle fight. Of course, every time this would happen, all the routine tests would come back normal, and the medical consensus was that I was suffering from abdominal adhesions and other problems from the car wreck. So I continued living my life the best I could with countless sick days, semi-routine trips to the ER, and labels such as hypochondriac and drug seeker. In 2014, I'd been married for 5 years and began having tremors in my hands. Tremors turned to weakness, the weakness turned to paralysis, and before I knew it, I was paralyzed in both my arms. I saw a neuromuscular specialist at University Hospital, and he diagnosed me with chronic inflammatory demyelinating polyneuropathy and treated accordingly. I recovered about 80%, and 4 months later it happened again, completely paralyzed in both arms. I recovered about 90%, and about 4 months later it happened again, except this time it was much, much worse. I remember the first 3 weeks in the hospital because of the horrifying and utterly terrifying hallucinations and delirium. When I finally returned to reality, I was paralyzed in all 4 limbs, parts of my face, my vocal cords, and I was numb from the neck down. I was told I nearly died from respiratory arrest and other complications, but the look on my wife's face told me everything that I needed to know. It was bad, and nobody had any idea what to do. So we went to the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota, and after 10 days of extensive testing, they discovered my PBG level was 350 times above the acceptable normal range. And DNA tests confirmed that all this time, everything from the seizures to the abdominal pain to the nausea to the excruciating body pain, the paralysis, the neuropathy, the hallucinations, the anxiety, everything was due to one disease, and it was acute porphyria. And because I went so long without treatment, I was a 112-pound quadriplegic. I was granted disability because my career was no longer possible. With endless hours of physical therapy and panhematin infusions, I slowly began to regain movement. However, my PBG levels was still extremely high, so we began weekly panhematin treatments, which I continue to this day. Mondays are treatment days. I spend the day at the clinic getting treatment, saline and morphine. Tuesdays are my sick days, where I spend all day in bed recovering from the previous day's treatment. Wednesdays and Thursdays are pretty good. Fridays are kind of hit or miss. Saturdays, my porphyria symptoms come back, and I don't really have the energy to truly enjoy the time with my wife and my friends and my family. Sundays are worse. I'm lucky to make it to church, and really lucky if I can go to brunch with my wife, which is something we've done every Sunday since we were engaged. I use the majority of my pain pills Friday through Sunday. But luckily, first thing Monday, I'm back at the doctor's. Panhematin has reduced the severity of my attacks, but has not stopped them from happening. Last year, I had over 80 panhematin infusions to help control the symptoms. I'm petrified that the paralysis and the hallucinations and the seizures will return. So having one drug made by one drug company causes me a lot of anxiety. What happens if, God forbid, I can no longer tolerate the panhematin, or it becomes unavailable because of a safety recall, or the manufacturer stops making it because it costs too much, or they go out of business? This is not paranoia or hyperbole. It's the precarious reality of having only one lifeline. And panhematin is a lifeline, but we need a safety net. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you this morning. I used to love giving people the thumbs up, but I can't do that anymore because of the paralysis. So I just give you the thumbs forward, which is even better because that's the direction we need to go, is forward. Thank you.
While you're returning to your seats, I will begin by asking, and you can come forward if you have something to add, how many of you, if you'd like to describe your clinical experience and the impact, which one of these symptoms do you feel has impacted you the most? Would anybody like to start? Ariel?
Thank you, Desiree. I apologize. Each of your stories has resonated so very deeply with me, and it feels very emotional to have the opportunity to speak with all of you. Thank you to the FDA and experts and patients and families for joining today. Absolutely, the stories that we've heard this morning are individual experiences with what is undoubtedly an indescribably difficult disease. And I can absolutely relate to the stories of pain, to the stories of intractable vomiting, to the stories of uncertainty in diagnosis, to the stories of limited relief from existing treatments, and hope for the future, combined with disappointment and relapse, combined with hope in the future. So I do like to think that that the world does sort of move in that trajectory. My personal experiences have had shared undertones with a lot of the stories that you've heard today. I was diagnosed in 2010. I was 30 years old, following a surgery and several recurring attacks and several failed attempts and misattempts at diagnoses. Since then, I have tried GnRH agonist therapy, hematin infusions as infrequently as once a month, as frequently as 3 times a week. I've had hospitalizations every year, sometimes for weeks. I've suffered with hallucinations. I've suffered with extreme weight loss and volatility. I have missed countless days from work. I have missed countless opportunities to raise my children and be an active partner to my husband and a contributing member of society. Some days I feel like I'm not sort of pulling my weight, just being a human being. So I am optimistic and excited about particularly identifying better options for patients who are living this way, identifying ongoing continuing research and treatment that will improve the quality of life of people who suffer from all the porphyrias, particularly who suffer in these horrific and very real and very frequent ways.
Thank you, Ariel. Ariel is an attorney, I think, in Philadelphia, and certainly missed a lot of work. Are there others? I know Rose, James, you wanted to speak?
My name is Rose. Oh.
Is anyone else cold in here, or is it just me? Cold, yes. What? It's not just me. Let me ask someone to handle. Go ahead, Rose, I'm sorry.
Okay, I'm Rose. I'm 46 years old, and I have acute intermittent porphyria. I was diagnosed when I was 30 years old by Dr. Carl Anderson. But my journey to that diagnosis was long, and my subsequent journey living as a person with porphyria has been nothing short of a living hell. But I know I've heard a lot of people say that this morning too. I know Desiree wanted me to talk a little bit about how hard it was for me to get diagnosed. I had a family history. When I was in high school, my cousin Jennifer was diagnosed with acute intermittent porphyria, and her doctors recommended that everyone in my family be tested for the disease. So my mom and I sent off 24-hour urine porphobilinogen collections to the Mayo Clinic, and we both received the diagnosis of, well, it said suggestive of, but not conclusive for a diagnosis of acute intermittent porphyria. Well, what my doctor said that meant is that I was a carrier and I could pass the disease on to my offspring, but that I would not actually exhibit any symptoms of the disease myself. That was not true. The truth is that acute intermittent porphyria is an insidious disease, and it has had a negative impact on all aspects of my life, from my career to my relationships to my daily quality of life. It took over 12 years from the time I found out I had a family history of the disease to receiving a conclusive diagnosis from Dr. Anderson. When I was 28 years old, I began to experience severe abdominal pains. I was partially paralyzed for several weeks. And because of the family history and because this pain was unlike anything I had ever felt, I I suspected that porphyria was the cause, but I was not a medical professional. And I was told by my internal medicine doctor at Stanford that it was far more likely that I had lupus or multiple sclerosis. So she tested me for those instead. All of those tests were negative, and then she agreed finally to test me for porphyria. And this is where it gets a little crazy. The tests that I had at the time, and I was symptomatic at the time, the normal porphobilinogen range on the tests that I was given, the normal range was 0 to 400. My levels ranged between 17,000 and 23,000. Well, my internist said that she had spoken with a porphyria specialist who told her that my levels would have to be at 25,000 or higher, that 23,000 wasn't high enough. And yet again, I was told that I was a carrier of the disease, that I didn't actually have it, just that I could pass it on. She also told me that because of that, my abdominal pain and my temporary paralysis were probably due to another condition, not porphyria. It would be almost 3 more years before I received a conclusive diagnosis of AIP. This was after I gave blood at my local office blood drive in September of 2001. Giving blood triggered an attack, which made my initial attack seem minor. The pain that I experienced with this attack, I've never felt pain. I had never felt pain like this. I have since felt it. It felt like I was being stabbed in the stomach. I say with a dull knife, but there was a fiery component to the pain, and I still have a very hard time describing what that feels like. I often tell people that my abdomen is like, during an attack, my abdomen is like a Weber grill, and I'm full of hot coals, and it burns. And there is nothing that takes the pain away, even when I'm hospitalized, even when I'm receiving IV opioids, high doses of medications like Dilaudid when morphine isn't strong enough, still often don't take the pain away, or it takes several days to get the pain under control. Porphyria affects every aspect of my life. I lost my career as a copy editor for a large publishing company, and I loved that job. I couldn't handle the long work hours that were necessary for this type of work. I've lost friendships because I am sick a lot, and I am an unreliable friend. Friends will only take so many cancellations of social engagements before your phone stops ringing. And they'll only hear that you're too sick to go out so many times before they move on. And as terrible as the disease is for someone who has it, I really want to add that it's also terrible for the people who love patients who have the disease, caregivers, spouses. Porphyria has such a negative impact on significant relationships. It can be bonding during a crisis. If you're with a person who loves you, who is by your side in the hospital, that can be very bonding, and it can show you how much your partner loves you. But on a daily basis, when you factor in repeated hospitalizations and doctor's visits and canceled social engagements, moodiness, more doctor's visits, and who looks sexy when they're vomiting, really, porphyria takes its toll on marriages, friendships. I don't have kids, but I know many of you do, and I've heard the stories I know, I hear you when you tell me how hard it is to manage your relationships with your children. Another thing that I want to say just really quickly is just to give you an idea of what the last year has been like for me having this disease. And my disease is fairly well managed. I've been hospitalized 9 times in the last 12 months. Each hospitalization has lasted on average 7 days. So help me do the math. That's 63 days out of the last 365, which is about 17% of the last year spent in a hospital bed. That doesn't include the time that I've spent getting weekly infusions of panhematin, which is the only current treatment for the acute porphyrias. Each of these treatments takes several hours in an outpatient facility, in an outpatient infusion center, and causes severe side effects. I get terrible migraine headaches, vomiting for hours on end, body aches, flu-like symptoms, fever, sweats. Well, the infusions knock me out for at least a day and always leave me feeling hungover the next day. My schedule is definitely affected by the disease and by the treatments. If I get 1 infusion a week, and I do for 52 weeks a year with an additional 52 hangover days after the treatment, that's 104 days out of 365. Together with the hospitalizations, we're looking at about 50% of my life that is spent sick. It's hard to live a normal life when 50% of your life is spent being sick. I miss being a productive member of society. I miss having a career. I wanted to have children, and I wish I had been well enough to start a family. Thank you. That's really it. The one thing that I just want to leave you with is that panhematin has saved my life, but it has not restored my quality of life. And just to have the chance of receiving a new treatment, I would be willing to accept a higher than normal risk to get my quality of life back, because my life as it stands right now is not sustainable.
Thank you, Rose. Anyone else? Jasmine?
Good morning. My name is, I'm going to stand back so I can toss my cards over here. My name is Jasmine Hudson, and I was diagnosed with acute intermittent porphyria 3 years ago. My fight with porphyria began years before my diagnosis. I was severely dehydrated and in renal failure when my ultimate battle with porphyria was nearly lost on May 31st of 2013 when I arrived at Emory University Hospital. After a 28-day hospital stay, I was diagnosed by Dr. Bruce Mitchell, who had seen acute intermittent porphyria before at the Mayo Clinic. Leading up to my diagnosis, I had visited nearly every hospital in the metro Atlanta area as I was serving as an AmeriCorps member at an urban farm. In essence, hospitals turned me away with as little as prescription medication for stomach illnesses. Moreover, the majority believed that I was a drug seeker after pain medication, as I've heard from many of you all today. On one incredibly terrifying occurrence before my diagnosis, I was even confined to a psychiatric ward and given psych meds. Consequently, my mother had to travel from Georgia to Georgia from South Florida in order for me to be released to her. In addition, my gallbladder was removed. Simultaneously, porphyria continued to manifest in my body as a gut-wrenching pain in my abdomen, mental disorientation, shortness of breath, numbness in my hands and feet, insomnia, nausea, and black tar-like vomiting. My mother contacted the American Porphyria Foundation, and out of desperation for treatment, I entered every porphyria study possible, including the panhematin longitudinal and annulum studies at the University of Texas Medical Branch with Dr. Anderson and Dr. Edie. My physical state caused me to move home with my mother and seek disability benefits. I was hospitalized once a month for 7 days at a time before finding a doctor that would treat me. Currently, I receive monthly panhematin infusions and pain management. I travel roughly an hour away from my home to receive this treatment. For the past 3 months, I've been without a porphyria attack. Thank you all for listening to my story.
Before we go on, Kim Stinson.
Good morning, thank you. My name is Kimberly Stinson. I was diagnosed with HCP, hereditary coproporphyria, in my early 20s. I'm now in my late 40s, and I had suffered for over 2 years before we knew what was causing all of my symptoms. It was an extremely frustrating couple of years, filled with doctor's visits, emergency room visits, hospitalizations, and test after test after test. I too had my gallbladder removed, probably unnecessarily, because the symptoms didn't go away. My symptoms got progressively worse while my doctor tried to find a diagnosis. The pain was excruciating and unrelenting. The neuropathy made it difficult to walk at times, and the mental agitation made it unbearable to be around people, even my own children. I, like most people, have coexistent medical conditions that porphyria makes difficult to treat due to the fact that so many things can send us into an attack. Medications I've taken to treat PMS, endometriosis, and a bladder disease that I have caused long-lasting and reoccurring attacks, resulting in numerous costly hospitalizations. I've spent years having continuous monthly attacks brought on by hormones, like others. I've had to have years of monthly injections to stop these cyclical attacks, but these treatments come with their own set of problems and are in no way a cure or long-term solution. There are very few treatments for acute porphyria. I have been managing my disease with panhematin, and I'm grateful for its existence, but I look forward to the day when we have more treatment options. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you so much. We've also heard that the diagnostic journey can be very long. Would any of you like to share? All right, here we go. Okay. Thank you. All right.
Good morning. My name is Nicole Lindsay Kirby. I'm 33 years old. I suffer with acute intermittent porphyria. My symptoms first appeared during my pregnancy. My son is now almost 4 years old. While those symptoms began during that pregnancy, my wonderful hematologist, Dr. Naveen Manchanda, believes that my first symptoms initially appeared when I was 15 years old, when I contracted Epstein-Barr virus, more commonly known as mono. In June of 2015, I was bitten by a tick. I believe that this started an avalanche of symptoms that eventually led to my diagnosis with acute intermittent porphyria. I was in a great deal of pain, and I presented to the emergency room more than 10 times because I do not have insurance, and my doctor was not able to provide me with care. Because of newly minted laws, doctors were not able to see me at that time because I did not have health insurance. Fast forward to October of 2015. I was in my first full-blown attack. I made a pallet on the floor between my sister's bedroom door and her bathroom door, and I laid there for 6 days. I thought that I was going to die. I couldn't eat. I couldn't drink. All I could do was vomit. I was in and out of consciousness for 6 days. Those days all blurred together. I presented to 3 different emergency rooms, and they all denied me care, with the exception of one. That facility recognized that I was in pain. They detected a lemon-sized cyst on my left ovary, and they decided to give me ketamine. This drug sent me into the most terrifying, and I felt at the time, life-threatening hallucination. This was a true psychedelic trip. I was scared to death. I literally thought that I was in hell. My son was in the room crying. My sister was in the room with him. The doctors quickly ushered them out of the room. They said, "Don't worry, she'll be asleep in a second." When I woke up, they sent me home without a treatment plan. The vomiting continued. The vomiting continued for 3 more days. I spoke with my son's father. He told me to go back to the hospital, and he advised me not to present with pain. He said, "Go in there and tell them that you cannot stand to be sick anymore." And it worked. By the time I went to this doctor, I was so confused. I was so afraid. I thought I was going to die, okay? And when they accepted me into the hospital that day, I had lost 15 pounds. I had severe hyponatremia. And what I now perceive as a blessing in disguise, I went into a terrible seizure. I wet the bed, my face turned blue. My sister screamed and cried for the doctor to come in the room. They put an oxygen mask on my face and I came to. I do not remember much of that night other than begging the doctors to email my students to tell them I wouldn't be in class the next morning at 8 a.m. And through all of that, at that moment I cared more about my students, you know, having to traverse the traffic, and a lot of them are students who have to commute or use public transportation. And so I was caring about them, but I wasn't able to care for myself, okay? And I had lost those 15 pounds. Since then, my weight has continued to fluctuate. At 5'5½", I went from 128 pounds to 98 pounds. I am proud to say today, I am up to 115 pounds again. I feel great. And furthermore, there's a mental struggle that we don't get to talk about, okay? There's a mental struggle that a lot of us do face, the depression, the anxiety, the hallucinations, and all these things. It is absolutely terrifying to have to live with this. When I went into the hospital, they gave me many, many blood tests. I had an endoscopy, colonoscopy. They gave me CAT scans. They thought maybe something was wrong with my brain. And at that point, I agreed. There was probably something wrong with my brain. I did have PRESI, which is evident in acute intermittent porphyria. I had a HIDA scan, and I thought that I had my answer. My gallbladder was 15% functional, so they decided to remove my gallbladder. I don't know to this day whether that was something that was actually needed. When they finally got the results back from Utah, it was October 29th, my mother's 69th birthday. They did not give me those results immediately. I went in for my gallbladder surgery on November 5th. They took my gallbladder out. They didn't tell me about the surgery. They didn't tell me about this diagnosis. I went in for a follow-up 3 weeks later with my surgeon. Her name's Mary Kay Turner. She's lovely. She's an amazing surgeon, wonderful person. She was checking my stomach. I was describing the pain that I had. My whole entire torso felt like I was being slammed in a train door or a car door repeatedly, just hit after hit. She told me that she thought that it was just pain left over, nerve pain from the incisions. And I tried to convince her that it wasn't. When we went to check out, she looked in my chart and she found a note. The note said that the lab results from Utah had come back and they were consistent with acute intermittent porphyria. She said, "Have you heard about this?" And I told her no, I had not heard about it. She gave me a piece of paper. It said porphyria on it. She said, "You're a smart girl, go home and look it up." And I did. One of the first things that I found was I need to end? Okay, well, I will end with just telling you that the one thing that I have, the one moment of clarity that I have each day, I wake up and I think that suicide is my only cure. If I could implore you to find more options for us, we need more options. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Back to the diagnostic journey. Would any of you like to share about your lengthy diagnostic journey? Mm-hmm. Candace Johnson? Yeah, why don't you go first, Candace? Yes, thank you, Dr. Bo. You'll have to keep it.
Yep. Hi, my name is Candace Johnson. I was diagnosed in 2010 with hereditary coproporphyria. My journey was pretty long being diagnosed. I originally had a lot of pain, and I went to a lot of different doctors. My parents were very insistent with what was going on with me. I was 18 years old, going to emergency room after emergency room with vomiting and sick. I had a great advocate with the doctor that I have right now, a hematologist. He's everything. His name's Harrison Baccarat. He's amazing. He had sent me up to a specialist. Unfortunately, the specialist tested my parents because they thought I had acute intermittent. It took me over 10 years to get diagnosed.
That's the important part.
Yep, it took me 10 years to get diagnosed. I was so sick that I had gallbladder pancreatitis, and when they got there, they basically said, they gave me TPN, and I was just extremely sick. They did everything, and they finally got everything under control. Once I got there, my doctors all worked together, and now I have a treatment plan. We work through everything together, and I just think it's so important that all of our doctors work together as one unit to help us through everything, because it worked so well for me, because it just affected my life in so many ways before all of that. And without our doctors working together to find something and help us with a new plan, we're just really helpless without it. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. I know that we are hearing many stories that are very similar, but these patients have traveled a long way, and they want you to hear them. So I appreciate your patience, and thank you. Evelyn Jacobucci, and Evelyn, you'll have to keep it short and sweet.
So my name is Evelyn Jacobucci. I am 37 years old, and I'm a mother of 4 children. I have acute intermittent porphyria, and I suffered with brutally intense pain for 22 years without a diagnosis. I was adopted, so I had very little family history to go by. I began when I was 8 with throbbing headaches and fiery, piercing abdominal pain. Despite many scans and multiple blood and urine tests, there was no diagnosis or treatment that was found. In my early adult life, I endured numerous laparoscopic surgeries, an appendectomy, a gallbladder removal, and Lupron treatments, all in hopes of finding a source or a treatment to the pain. In 2009, I was a 29-year-old single mother working an excellent high-paying job with Homeland Security with advancement and financial security when the pain became so frequent and so intense I was passing out at work. I was dating a wonderful man named Sam, and he was with me during those frequent hospital trips. And he was also there when a doctor finally found a diagnosis and suggested porphyria testing. My PVG was elevated, and I was terrified. I insisted that we split so he would not be burdened with me, because we feel like such a burden to our families. He not only stayed with me, but he married me with the full knowledge of where this disease would take us. My doctor insisted that due to the unpredictability of this disease, that I needed to quit my job, what I'd worked so hard for. My husband supported us financially until shortly after the birth of our fourth child, when the nature of this disease once again changed and caused me to require constant care and monitoring. And so he quit his job and went to EMT school to learn how to take care of me. And he has been my constant caregiver now for 4 years. But because of that loss, we lost everything. And we are now on food stamps, Medicaid, and we live with my parents in order to survive. In January of 2015, I underwent a hysterectomy, again in hopes that it would stop the porphyria flares. Shortly afterwards, I suffered a pulmonary embolism, and my blood clotting levels never went back to normal, and therefore my hematologist would not give me panhematin for the treatment. I do have a chest port, and I have an amazing home nurse, and they help me to run the D10 on a daily basis, along with the oral pain and nausea medications. Despite that, I was still in the ER 70 times last year, in 6 hours at a time. With 4 small children, that is not an easy feat. I require those additional IV medications, and I'm here, please offer us an additional security for those of us that cannot take panhematin, that we can live a life and be good, fulfilling members of our families. Thank you.
Some people have suffered paralysis, and I know Tracy wanted to speak to that. You've seen Colin McEwen, me, a number of other people. It's a very scary and debilitating problem. And I know it's hard for you to stand. Would you like to sit, or you want to stand a minute?
I can stand.
Okay.
Yeah. My name is Tracy Kelly, and I have acute intermittent porphyria. This is actually my 20th anniversary of being diagnosed. For 2 years previous to my diagnosis, I was in and out of the hospital. Before I was diagnosed, I was already paralyzed from the neck down. I was that way for 6 months. They gave me, finally, they started doing spinal taps, trying to figure out what was wrong with me. All my other testing was inconclusive. After the 3rd spinal tap, they figured it was between Guillain-Barré or porphyria. Once they decided it was porphyria, they're like, we're not treating you. You got to be switched to a different hospital. And this came from the chief of staff. I was switched to another hospital. Luckily there, they gave me panhematin before it went to my respiratory system. I was already in ICU at that time. I was paralyzed for 6 months. Then I went home and had to do the whole getting back to normal. Moving from that point, I have been in the hospital probably over 100 times. I ended up in a coma, strokes, seizures, all because of the porphyria. And that was after being in the hospital and having hematin treatment for a week. They released me. I told them I wasn't feeling well. They're like, just go home, you're fine, it's just a respiratory infection. A week later, I was in a coma, have no memory of May or June 2014. Had to go through therapy again to learn how to walk because the paralysis came back. I still go through paralysis at times when I go through attacks. I have attacks probably once a month, and I'm in the hospital from anywhere from 4 to 10 days. And I have to use a walker or a cane, depending on how well the panhematin works. Sometimes I go home fine. Other times they're like, okay, we're doing home therapy for you, and you have to learn with the walker and everything again. So I hope that we can come up with something better that we can use that will have more longer lasting effect on us instead of having to go in on a regular basis because we're having these regular attacks because the panhematin just goes through our body so fast. So thank you.
Thank you very much. One more very quickly before the break. Lena Rebitz would like to speak about unsafe drugs, because a simple drug you don't realize will change your entire life.
Hi guys, my name is Lena Rebitz and I have acute intermittent porphyria. As we now know, birth control pills are very unsafe in porphyria, and so of course I took them all throughout high school before I was diagnosed. I didn't have a real attack until I came to college, but all throughout high school I had really bad headaches and nausea. I was vomiting almost every morning. But so I thought that I just didn't tolerate hormones very well, so I stopped taking them my senior year. And then when I came to college, I had my first attack, and the pain came on really suddenly. It felt like someone was taking my intestines and wringing them out like a towel. And I was in the ER, and all the doctors were telling me that there was nothing physically wrong with me. That attack subsided on its own after a while, and then a few months later in December, I decided it was time to start birth control again because I didn't have the diagnosis and I didn't know any better. I was on vacation with my family and I took the first pill and the same pain came back immediately. I got so bad I could barely leave the hotel room, and my parents tried to coax me out of the hotel bed saying they would take me shopping or take me to a nice dinner, and they knew something was terribly wrong when I didn't want to do either of those things. When we came home from vacation, I had my first seizure. I was rushed to the emergency room, and overnight I had my second seizure. Following the seizures, I was admitted to the neuro ICU, and I had posterior reversible encephalopathy syndrome, PRES, which basically meant that the fluid in my brain wasn't draining. So my neurologist thought to test for porphyria. Before getting the diagnosis confirmed, I was seen by a hematologist, by a gastroenterologist, an internist, among others, and my gynecologist was absolutely convinced that I had polycystic ovary syndrome. And she thought that the cure would be to give me a Depo-Provera shot of hormones, and I'm so lucky that my mom was there and said absolutely not, because my mom had seen what 2 hormone pills had done to me. So she put her foot down, and 5 days later I got the confirmed diagnosis of acute intermittent porphyria, and I started recovering. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can we have one webcast question, and then we'll take a break? All right. Well, I can tell you what one of them is, and it's been mentioned. Often patients are said, this is all in your head, or you're a drug seeker. Would anybody like to make a very short comment about that? All right, Tracy.
Can I just do it here?
No, you can just stand right there.
Before I was diagnosed, I was already paralyzed, and I was actually told I can get up and walk at any moment. It was all in my head. There was nothing wrong with me. This was after EEGs, seeing every specialist at that hospital. Once I was diagnosed and I got transferred to the university, they did the same EEG and found out that every nerve was damaged.
Very quickly, I will add something. To me, the most demeaning part, the most horrible part is the pain, but the most demeaning is to be said, you're being a drug seeker, because your pain can't possibly be that bad. And that was demeaning. And I had that happen when I was head of the Porphyria Foundation, a member of the MD Anderson Cancer Center board, the University of Texas Medical Branch board, honorary PhD, my master's, etc. And no one would even believe the pain. Now, this was when I was in an emergency in another hospital and didn't have my care. Please take a break, be back very promptly, and we're going to talk about how this affects employment and your finances. And thank all of you. Welcome back. Thank you again so much. We sincerely appreciate everyone who has shared their life, and that's hard to do. It's a very intimate thing. It's a very painful thing, and we sincerely appreciate. This afternoon, we'll be ending our program with how has this affected your employment, your finances, and your family life in general. We'll start with Sharon Dill.
Good morning. My name is Sharon Dill. I'm 52 years old and I have varigate porphyria. Imagine that you've accomplished your life's goals. So many things you've gotten done. You've worked hard, sometimes 3 jobs at a time, to put yourself through undergrad school and then later earn your master's. You have an incredibly demanding job that you love. A year ago, you bought your dream home. You're in the best health of your life, work out 5 days a week, and on the weekends, enjoy rollerblading, biking, and the great Florida beaches. And then one Sunday morning, you wake up. You take a step out of bed, and you feel a slight twinge, a little pain in your side. What you don't know at that time, what you can't possibly know, is that that slight pain, the twinge, it's a warning. It's a warning that your life is about to change in ways you never could have imagined. That is exactly what happened to me. On Sunday, April 13, 2014, I woke up and my life changed forever. The twinge became a stabbing pain that leaves me doubled over. It feels like an elephant is sitting on my chest and literally takes my breath away. Unrelenting nausea can come like a tidal wave, and I've learned to keep my vomit bag always within reach. And most recently, I've been suffering from cerebral vasculitis that is so excruciating painful, all I can do is cry and beg God to help me. Since that April morning, I've had 3 Metaport surgeries. 2 have caused severe acute reactions requiring hospitalization, and I've been hospitalized for 43 days. The career I worked so hard for is gone. Working out is a distant memory. I've gained over 50 pounds due to numerous glucose infusions and my sedentary life. Too many holidays, too many birthdays have been spent curled up on the couch in the fetal position, too sick to participate, too sick to join my family. My self-esteem and self-confidence are almost non-existent. Living with varigate porphyria means giving up the Florida beaches and working in your yard, as your hands and arms will swell with blisters. It means spending $1,000 to cater your annual Christmas party because you no longer have the stamina to do it, and then having to cancel the whole party because you're in the hospital again. Living with varigate porphyria means invitations to parties, baseball games, and other activities stop coming because too many times you have to cancel at the last minute. And often you find yourself lying about why you're canceling, because who wants to hear, "I'm too sick to go," again and again and again. Living with varigate porphyria means missing out on fun with my nieces and nephews. It means being on a first-name basis with your local pharmacist who fills your pain and nausea meds that allow you to function and get through the day. Living with varigate porphyria means you're no longer able to walk your dog because you don't have the energy to walk to the door. It means trips to the clinic for panhematin infusions and hoping it won't clog your metaport, requiring yet another surgery. Living with variegate porphyria means trips to Alabama are no longer to cheer the Crimson Tide, but are to participate in research. It means not being sure until a few minutes ago whether I would be sick or have stabbing pain that would not allow me to be here to speak with you today. Living with variegate porphyria means it never occurred to me that one day I'd wake up sick and never get better. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi. 22 years ago, I had a simple ear infection, and they gave me sulfonamide antibiotics. On the fourth day, my fiance came home and found me passed out on the floor. I still don't know if I fainted or had a seizure or what. Just had increasingly had flu pain, or what I thought was the flu, getting worse and worse over those 4 days. I call this my sleeping dragon, and it was woken up that day. Over the next 18 months, I suffered 12 attacks, all of which brought me to the ER, resulted in 7 hospitalizations out of 12 attacks. While waiting to be admitted during the 12th attack, I heard a doctor out in the hall make a joke. He laughingly said, "I thought I told you nurses not to drink wine out of the urine sample cups." Even though I was out of it, I yelled into that hallway, "That's my pee." He came into my room, holding up the cup to the light, inspecting it, just fascinated. He had never seen port wine colored urine before. He asked me, "Is your urine always this color when you get sick?" as he's flipping through my records, and I said, "Yes." He said, "Have they ever tested you for porphyria?" I said, "I've never heard of it." And he's like, "That's what I'm going to test you for." This was not my doctor, just someone walking past and saw that urine. Just so happened he had watched the movie The Madness of King George 3 nights earlier, and that's what put that idea into his head. I don't know how long I would have gone without a diagnosis if it weren't for that fluke and for him walking by the minute that nurse set my urine cup down. So I was just so lucky that night. Before the attack started, my life was really the entire world. Even though I had never been on an airplane before I was 18, I had already been to 36 different countries. I really had a bad case of wanderlust there. I had found the perfect job for me. I was the international marketing director for a toy company. I enjoyed touring, caving, and cycling all over the world, and now nothing. I have now been on disability for 18 years, and I'm constantly having attacks. I have chronic acute pain and partially paralyzed hands and wrists. I am forced to live with my parents since I lost the home that I owned about 12 years ago. My life of globetrotting has now been reduced to a 12 by 12 bedroom. My body's been destroyed, and I now barely have the energy to even walk my dogs twice a week. This disease became particularly dangerous for me on 4 occasions. I dealt with Pseudomonas sepsis and a heart valve infection due to having infusions by port. I also had a catheter separate inside my body from a port. Then there was what I call my perfect storm attack. We had wildfires raging all around San Diego, structures were burnt by the hundreds, and ash was falling on my property like snow. This was at the same exact time as my progesterone peak, and at the time when panhematin was not available for an entire week. Around the 3rd day in the hospital, I started dropping things. The next day I kept falling down, and by the next day I was unable to sit up in bed. My entire body from the neck down became paralyzed, and I went into respiratory arrest. After 27 days, I left the hospital in a wheelchair. I spent the remaining 4 months in the wheelchair and then 2 months in a walker, doing physical and occupational therapy about 3 to 4 days a week for that entire 6 months. Even though most everything came back, this was in 2002, my hands, everyone can lift theirs to there, that's it. Can't lift my thumbs, just deadness. I mean, I can lift down, but I have no strength going upward at all. In total, I've had close to 100 attacks of porphyria, between 250 and 300 infusions of panhematin. I've gone through 6 ports, yet I continue to have severe debilitating attacks. Many symptoms that used to come and go with each attack have now become chronic and persistent, such as tachycardia, high blood pressure, acute pain, muscle weakness, and the paralyzed radial nerve. I also now have stage 4 chronic kidney disease, which my doctors do not know if it came from the disease itself or the treatment of the disease. I have been sick for 22 years, and my quality of life has become worse, not better. And this is despite hundreds of infusions, which is the only treatment available to us. At this point, I have no way to stop attacks, as prophylactic panhematin does not work for me. We need a drug that will prevent porphyria attacks from ever happening, since the damage from each attack seems to be cumulative. To me, the current treatment is just a Band-Aid. We need a new medicine that takes advantage of the new advances in technology over the last 20, 30 years in the medical field. I am really desperate for a cure for this disease. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Amy Chapman.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Amy Chapman. I'm 43. I too have acute intermittent porphyria. Thank you very much for coming today. I just want to say, put a little different spin on things. During an acute attack, the pain is excruciating. And the last thing that you want to have to deal with when you're in a hospital infusion setting is to make decisions, and it's hard to make decisions. This pain makes normal activities such as having a job or employment really unrealistic. Coupled with this are constant questions, raising doubts about your diagnosis, your needed medical procedures, how to get proper care, and medication. When I am in the hospital and I'm well, a few weeks later I have received countless bills in excess each time of over $383,000. And I always get a denial letter with that stating that the insurance companies will not cover anything. Reasoning that the drug itself, they've never heard of it, they've never heard of the disease, and it's so rare that you cannot possibly have it. Receiving communications such as this causes me a lot of stress and anxiety for me, and not only, but my husband too, because you wonder how you're going to pay for that or what can be done. And usually the snowballs for me, and I'm right back into another attack. And many times the hospitals, they code the treatment incorrectly, leading to the insurance companies to state that the medication cannot be covered, again, due to incorrect billing codes and no information available. So, despite being severely sick, not able to fend for yourself, sometimes you have to remain alert. Be ready to prove your case and your diagnosis along with the insurance company and the hospital while you are severely ill. And before my journey with AIP, I really enjoyed working in the financial industry and then moving into the medical field, but that was cut short because of my sickness. Now I know what my illness is and what my options are. I have made many lifestyle changes, and having a great support advocate on my side, I can enjoy some things when I'm not ill. You know, I really enjoy being an advocate, and I find it very energizing. And I have a saying that you will see us struggle, but you will not be allowed to fail. We will speak up to create a single voice. This will not save us from this disease, but it can save and preserve the life of the future generations.
Greg Chapman is here today to represent all of the caretakers, and for every patient, hopefully there's someone who loves them enough to be their caretaker.
Thank you, Desiree. My name is Craig Chapman. I'm probably one of the few people in this room that don't have porphyria, and I apologize for that. That's probably a mark against me a little bit. One thing I would like to say is this disease is unique in its interaction in human communication. I'll give you guys a quick, small parable. There's a man in a weather balloon, and he's floating in the desert. He sees another man on a hill, and he asks the man, "Where am I?" Well, the man looks at the guy in the weather balloon. He says, "You're in a weather balloon about 20 feet above this hill." The man looks down at him and says, "Obviously, you're an engineer, because your view of things told me exactly what I was doing, but had no bearing on the knowledge I needed to know." The engineer looks up at him and says, "Sir, it's obvious you're in management, because you asked me a question without any fear of reprisal, and you had no clue what was going on." As a caregiver, many times we are trying to decipher the communication almost as management. Now, the engineer, of course, is the one suffering from porphyria because we're trying to decipher a code. We don't understand the code. We don't know from where this codex begins. The mental fog that is associated with some of the symptoms doesn't allow us to have the proper communication that requires a deep understanding of another human being. So what you'll experience as a caregiver is, in my estimation, and I may be dumber than most people, so your mileage may vary in my estimates, about 5 years of understanding the disease with your partner and your direct care patient. And also, in that 5 years, we will be developing a language that only you understand. Now, that language may be the list of restaurants that sounds good when your patient, which is really what it is, doesn't feel good. Or it may be, is today a good day, and what's the ranking? Whatever it is, you'll be able to decipher that. It's going to take time, it's going to take effort, it's going to take care. One thing to keep in mind is never give up, never fail. You won't. You'll always be there if you want to put the work in. Putting the work in is always going to come first. It's always going to be something that you take pride in. So please do so. As we continue down this journey for different treatments, for possible cures, we need to continue to think as caregivers, how do we give that voice? Right? We know what everybody with porphyria wants to say. And pardon me for what I'm about to say. It may not be viewed with the most ginger methods, but there is a great degree of diagnostic hubris associated with those in the medical field that don't know about this disease and don't fully understand it. Right? I haven't been educated, and I went to school for 8 years. How can you possibly know, common lettered man, what you're talking about? Now, I understand the degree of self-consciousness and confidence that is required to be a professional in your field. The dismissive attitudes need to stop. Now, this is not, directly towards the medical field. It's we as a community, both as caregivers and patients, need to work together to break this down. Right? We need to prove that, yes, we've gone through a number of educational seminars. We've got the education to be able to say, hey, here's what's going on. I know where the break is. I know where the PBG is going out of control due to ALA and due to the other complications around it. Take a moment. Let's have a chat. Right? Without that, we'll never be able to make progress as a society. So, as a caregiver, do your utmost. Give them that voice. Patients are smart. Maybe we should make that a little hashtag for Jimmy Fallon. So let's all make that attempt together in a cooperative environment, both as caregivers, with our patients, and with medical professionals, to ensure that we're going to work cooperatively on this, because the divisive nature of what's been happening, and I've heard the stories, they're heartbreaking. You almost have to concentrate on something else to keep your stamina up. Those divisive stories tear apart not just us, but tear apart the fabric of mankind, and we can't allow that to happen. We're better than that. Thank you.
Cheryl Martinez.
Hello, My name is Cheryl Martinez. I am 41 years old and I have AIP. After many visits to my local ER at the hospital and receiving multiple dangerous medications for you name it, I was told I was crazy. Nothing was wrong with me. It was my ovaries, it was my bladder, it was my kidneys, and on and on. May 2015, going undiagnosed at these local ERs, I suffered 2 major seizures and was given medication. After that, I was on a vent for 4 days and left paralyzed head to toe and sent from place to place. I was wheelchair bound for over a year and away from my 2 kids and husband for 6 months in the hospital. I was finally diagnosed by Dr. Silver at the University of Michigan in June 2015. At that time, they completed multiple duplicate tests from the 2 previous hospitals and then diagnosed me through the Mayo Clinic in Mount Sinai with the acute intermittent porphyria. My 2 small children could also have this disease. Returning home to my house that was not handicap accessible, I still had 6 months of therapy at home until I was able to walk again with a walker, to a cane, and now slowly enduring pain from attacks throughout my body in different areas. I have burning in my abdomen, stabbing, aching pain in my back, pain in my joints, muscles, nerves, head to toe. April 2016, when everything started to settle down with myself, my mom started to spend time at home with my father, and she knew something wasn't right. He had a mass on his liver, and they had determined it was cancerous, and because of the way he was acting, my mom suggested that they test him as well. It turned out my father was the genetic carrier of the porphyria, and he passed away in August 2016, just shortly after I recovered. Doctors need to be aware of what we're going through and the pain that we suffer. Put yourself in our shoes and look at it that way. People call us crazy. They think it's in our head. Doctors look at us and tell us this. It's not fair. So thank you for allowing us to share our stories. It's important for everyone to hear.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. While the panel is, or I guess you can stay there if you like. Are there any other people who would like to talk about, I know Louise, you wanted to talk about how it affected your employment and your finances. Would you like to, or no? Okay.
Hi, I'm Louise Schlosser. I am 57 years old and I have AIP. First, I'd like to thank the American Porphyria Foundation. No one's got to say this yet. But I want to thank them for allowing me such an opportunity today to meet all of you. This is my first time I've ever met people with porphyria. I want to thank you for your continued support, your education, and your research for others with our incredible rare disease. I suffered for several years, starting at age 9, with migraines and had severe heavy aching legs like they were falling off for most of my childhood, so I thought pain was normal. But during my first attack, I was hospitalized for 7 days. The doctors were unable to diagnose me. So they began discussing, I could hear them in the other room, discussing removing several of my organs to find out why I was in such delirious pain. I called my mother. I was able to struggle to a phone somehow. And I told her I want to crawl into a cave. So those words triggered her. She asked my father to tell the doctors that he also had AIP. And the diagnosis then was given by giving me the proper urine tests, and treatments were began. And through these treatments that were repeatedly saved my life. For me, it's very difficult. It's been emotional for me to hear everyone's stories today. It's difficult to describe my 28-year journey in such a short time. Prior to this disease taking over my life, I was the owner of 5 successful businesses, 4 children. I had a girl I was adopting, very active, and like I think the doctor mentioned earlier, that you believe you can do anything. You have such a drive. But because of AIP, I lost absolutely everything over and over and over, including my normal life. I had worked so hard at that point, at 29 years old, to provide for my 4 sons on my own. I had 2 homes, but it was all about my children. So I lost everything that I'd worked so hard for. And now that we were forced to live on disability in California, basically had to live in a room. Sadly, I've never been able to return to work because my attacks were monthly, then bi-monthly, and then weekly. There were so many, countless doctors lacking knowledge or compassion. I am still called a drug seeker after all of my records in so many different hospitals. But finally, well, my attacks increased, I have to say. I required so many emergency rooms, lengthy hospitalizations, intensive care units, and ambulances because I was completely paralyzed. But finally, I had an internal medicine doctor, and he arranged for me to have in-home hospice care because my attacks were weekly, and he wanted me to stay home with my children. So that consisted of the 7-day week, 5 days, I was on a porphyria treatment, dry heaving in my bedside, and for 2 days, I was able to hurry up, shop, recover, and get ready for the next week, for my next attack for my children. As of this day, I still live in constant pain, and this is a serious subject for me, and it's the severe peripheral neuropathies and the multi-neuropathies that doctors now are linking to porphyria. Fortunately, though, again, I'm going to say panhematin did save my life, but in this whole process, I've had 10 portacasts, 17 PICC lines, and all kinds of lines in my neck and my feet and everywhere else they could possibly try to get them. They can barely draw my blood. So I live in fear constantly of having another attack because I have no access at all. I do want to say, though, that I'm, again, most grateful for the panhematin. It saved my life. But I want to end this by saying I do live in fear every day of having another porphyria attack because there's no way to treat me. So additional treatments are really needed. And again, I want to thank the FDA also, too, for hearing all of our stories today.
Anyone else on this subject? Danielle?
Hello, I am Danielle Tatarka. I'm 36 years old, and I have AIP. I was diagnosed with AIP in my early 20s after I watched my mom pass away from the disease at the age of 49. Her mother also had lost her life to AIP in her early 30s. I was fortunate enough to be a part of the DNA studies through the American Porphyria Foundation to confirm my diagnosis before I became symptomatic. When I was 33, I had my first attack that was life-changing. The stomach pain I felt was truly indescribable and actually very similar to what someone else had said. Like my stomach, my organs were getting wrung out like a towel constantly. After waiting 3 hours in the ER to be treated, I received pain meds that barely touched the pain. After I finally convinced the doctors I was in an attack, even though I already had a letter stating I had a diagnosis from porphyria specialists, they finally gave me the dextrose IVs and panhematin. I began to improve. However, I still remained in the hospital for a week due to the attack and other complications. After a week-long stay, I incurred thousands of dollars in hospital bills, months of recovery, and I had to change careers and my total lifestyle to focus on my health. I held many successful full-time positions in management and had to quit because my body could no longer handle the workload. I dropped to part-time status in hopes of maintaining some sort of function, but with that also means a loss of medical insurance. And the stress of that can trigger an attack in itself because you're worrying about, am I going to get sick? Will I have medical coverage? So even with those changes, I still struggle daily with insomnia, brain fog, sensitivity to light, sound, and smell. I become symptomatic before monthly cycles and have ended up in the ER just after receiving one routine medical procedure. And that one procedure set me back $6,000 in one day. Because I was determined to stop this cycle, I also made the decision to not have children due to this disease. I cannot personally, knowingly pass this disease on, taking that risk, putting a child through the devastation I watched with my mother and what my mother watched, suffering such painful and debilitating attacks. The physical and mental effects of this disease has changed what I thought my life would be in so many ways. So while speaking about this part of my life is so difficult, I couldn't pass up the opportunity to share it with you all today in hopes that we can have more treatment options. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Danielle. Before we go on, no, go ahead. We have a webcast, and this is a question for FDA. They would like to know, why does it take so long to get a drug approved? Anybody want to answer?
Well, there are a variety of issues that come into play, including the development of the product, manufacturing, the animal studies, and then the clinical studies. And depending on whether you identify the right target to target your drug or not, development can go smoothly. There are also issues regarding safety and effectiveness that need to be collected and understood at the time that a new drug application or biologics licensing application is submitted.
Thank you. Would you like to add anything? Yes, sometimes it takes a long time, doesn't it? But you want to have something safe. I know there were a couple of other people who wanted to just talk very quickly about employment, finances, effect on your family. Tara Cantley.
Hi, my name is Tara Cantley. I am 39. This is going to be very hard for me. Okay, so I wasn't diagnosed until 2002. However, I was born with porphyria, acute intermittent porphyria. I started showing symptoms as early as age 11. My doctors attributed my pain at the time to growing pains. My mother would watch me scream into a pillow several times a week, every single day, rolling around in pain on the floor. I always had severe stomach pain throughout my teens, but nothing was ever done about it. She just let it go on. In 2002, while pregnant with my second child, I suffered extreme pain in my liver in my 8th month of pregnancy. My doctor was ready to do a liver biopsy when someone finally spoke up in my family and told me that we had the history of porphyria that they were keeping secret because they didn't want anybody thinking that they had something wrong in my family, because they're very taboo about things like this. So then my doctor was getting ready to cut on me, and my family members spoke up. And they did a test. They did a Watson-Short test on me, and 2 weeks later, it was positive. And then I was reconfirmed by Dr. Anderson while doing research in Texas. That was the beginning of the end of my somewhat normal life. It's been a roller coaster ever since. Countless hospitalizations, probably over 100, over 30 PICC lines in both my arms, and I'm currently on my 3rd port. I've been septic 3 times. I've tried Lupron. Porphyria has taken literally everything away from me. My ability to work, my ability to go to school, to have a career. I should be a forensic scientist right now. It took my children. My ex-husband took my children from me because he said I was not fit to be a mother because I was so sick all the time. So, it's heart-wrenching when your health is used against you and you have no control. I have not seen my babies in 5 years. I hate Porphyrias so much. It's caused me so much pain and heartache. It prevents me from planning anything day to day. I can't even go to the store, and when I do, I end up sitting in an aisle because I can't walk around. I keep getting worse. I've developed POTS this year, which is postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome on top of everything else. I get 12 infusions every month. I am on home health care. It's so hard to plan or have a life around all of this. In December, I spent 19 days in bed. January, 7 days in the hospital and 14 days in bed. And in February, I spent 12 days in bed. I tend to end up in the hospital every 2 months to receive panhematin, and it has brought me back from paralysis 3 different times. We need something more, because this is not living life. This is pure suffering. Thank you.
Jackie Thomas, there you go. You had wanted to talk about this?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. I got it from an awesome lady named Amy. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jacqueline Thomas. I'm 55 years old. I was diagnosed with acute intermittent porphyria in 1985 at the age of 24. So I've been having porphyria for 32 years. It's been a struggle. My oldest 2 daughters, 36 and 27, also have AIP. We are all 3 currently in stage 3 of kidney failure. When I'm in an attack, I'm literally not mobile. I need assistance doing everything from getting out of bed, going to the bathroom, taking a shower. Got my little notes. My body literally shuts down. I can't do anything for myself. I too get home care provider services. I too cannot work. I can't walk when I'm in an attack. I can't work. I can't stand. I need assistance with everything. I can't do daily tasks. My 2 older children used to have to take care of me when I was in severe attacks at home, and they were small kids. But the thing I want to address is that being in pain constantly and going to the ER and being demeaning by doctors saying there's nothing wrong with me, or they've sent me to psychiatrists and put me on psychotropic medications saying that I'm crazy, there's nothing wrong. Well, there's only one other person in my family that had AIP, which was my brother. He's no longer here. He lost his life. So for me, I know that panhematin is good, and it works good for most, a lot of people that have acute intermittent porphyria. But unfortunately for me, panhematin does not work for me. My body is super sensitive to the panhematin. So a new treatment is absolutely essential for me. It has caused a huge impact on my life. My life has changed severely, but I'm grateful to the American Porphyria Foundation, Desiree, Terry, Amy, all of you ladies, Jessica, all of you ladies, and everybody else in the group that I comment with on a daily basis. Awesome group of people. The group is very awesome. It's very encouraging group, uplifting. We support each other. And I just want you guys to know that when I joined that group, it changed my life. I don't feel alone anymore. And I feel like that people care, because nobody has ever cared about this disease that I have that has changed my life. Thank you for hearing my story.
I know her daughter, LaToya, would like just to say a few words. You can do the obstacle course. Whoops. Is it this? Oh, it's outside. Oh. I once stood in an elevator with my keys, trying to open the elevator with my car keys. So.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is LaToya. I also suffer from acute intermittent porphyria. Unfortunately, after many misdiagnoses that almost cost me my life, I was diagnosed with porphyria in 2003. Since I've been diagnosed, I've suffered through horrendous stabbing pains in my abdomen, my lower extremities. I suffer from tachycardia, nausea, vomiting, constipation, muscle fatigue, anxiety, confusion, memory loss, depression, back pain, temporary paralysis in different body parts, and possibly neuropathy, which I've been experiencing for the past year, and been more severe in the past couple of months. It feels like I'm being attacked by fire ants. Anemia, stage 3 kidney failure, issues with my heart, extreme fatigue, and the lack of ability to regenerate and quickly heal. When I have an attack that come on, and they last sometimes a couple of minutes, sometimes days, sometimes a couple of months, I'm finding it hard to heal. After the attack, I'm sore. After the stabbing pain, then I'm sore and my body is sore, my muscles are sore. So it's hard to heal, and I used to not be like that. I used to have an attack, and then after treatment of glucose and treatment of pain medications, because unfortunately I'm one of the ones who can't tolerate the panhematin, I'm allergic to it, I would feel a little better. But now, after glucose and pain medication, those regimens, I'm still in a bed. I'm disabled now. I just lost my job again recently in January. And so for me, it's extremely important for some type of research into another medication. The panhematin, when I was administered, it almost cost me my life. I ended up in ICU. It burned the muscle mass in both my arms. So I always try to wear sleeves because I have indentations now in my arms. So I'm just standing in the need for those who weren't able to come and talk, and for those who can't take the panhematin, if y'all can please help us, because it's scary going through life not having anything to help you with your disease and not knowing. My biggest fear and anxiety is that I will have a big attack and it will affect my heart and I will ultimately die. My kids have had to raise me and take care of me, and I should be raising them. This disease cost me my first marriage, and so I would love to continue to live, but I haven't lived since I've been diagnosed. So if y'all could help us out, it would mean a lot to my children. Amen.
Well said, LaToya. Lastly, before we close the patient voice part, there are a number of people here who are involved in research, but Lakeisha would like to talk about, is Lakeisha Johnson here? There she is. I love the fact that while she's coming up, on the APF has 5 Facebook groups, and she's Keisha So Blessed Johnson. That's her name. It's hard to say you're blessed, but when you're a person whose soul is blessed, you certainly can say it, can't you?
Hello, everyone. My name is Lakeisha Johnson, and I am 29 years old with AIP. When I was a teenager, before getting diagnosed at the age of 18, I suffered with chronic abdominal pain, constipation, nausea, and memory loss. From the year of 2005 to 2006, I went to several doctor's appointments looking for answers. As the time went by, my health was slowly declining. My pain was unbearable. I didn't even have an appetite due to stomach bloating and constipation and feeling fatigued. In January of 2006, my primary care doctor couldn't give me and my family a diagnosis. So she paired with a surgeon and a hematologist at a local hospital to find a diagnosis for me before it was too late. In the meanwhile, I was on pain medications for comfort, but I went from 126 pounds to 80 pounds in 4 weeks. For a month of not holding anything down and my health slowly declining even more, I finally received hope. A group of physicians entered my room at the hospital, tested me for porphyria, and when the results came back, I was immediately diagnosed with AIP. I am now a research patient on every research study in hopes to make life better for others. With the passion and dedication of Ms. Desiree and the hard work of planning of Jessica and the entire Porphyria staff, along with Dr. Anderson, Dr. Edie, and the other physicians that are involved with AIP, in combination with participation from us porphyria patients, I am very confident that a drug will be developed to prevent the attacks. Thank you all for attending.
Great job. Any more people before we close? Diana Sabella, I believe you were wanting to say something. Then we'll have questions. Anyone with questions, particularly those people from the FDA, those esteemed visitors? Diana Sabella.
Hello, everyone. My name's Diana Sabella, and I have acute intermittent porphyria. I'm currently 32 years old, and I had my very first attack about 3 years ago. I displayed the typical symptoms of an attack for weeks, which gradually got worse. The pain experienced was the worst I've ever had in all my life. I received my official diagnosis later after a hospital stay at Jefferson University Hospital in Philadelphia. Fortunately for me, the diagnosis did not take long due to the fact that I have a family history. My late grandfather and my mother both had AIP, and my mother, she passed away last year due to renal failure. Dr. Carl Anderson tested me at the age of 10 and confirmed that I carried the genetic trait for AIP. I was then able to connect with porphyria experts and was given appropriate treatment, which included infusions of panhematin. I have since had at least one attack on a monthly basis. Currently, I am fortunate enough to receive weekly panhematin infusions within my home from a nurse to manage my symptoms. Sometimes it just isn't enough. I've been admitted to the hospital several times since my diagnosis, and I've been close to death. And I know that if it weren't for panhematin, I would not be here today. I wasn't prepared for how my life would change in such a short time. I'm a college graduate, a former school teacher who currently cannot work due to my illness. I'm a wife, a mother who relies on my husband to carry out my daily activities at home. Since my attacks are often unpredictable, I have difficulty planning events, vacations, and are forced to break obligations. However, I remain hopeful for the future. I am very grateful for the APF and the entire medical community involved in porphyria research. I've participated in several studies already, and I become involved in whatever research I'm eligible for. The reason why I participate in research is because I want to help others like myself who suffer from this disease, raise awareness, and allow the medical community to understand more so that one day there may be something that could help this disease. Thank you so much for listening.
We thank all the patients and their families who have come. And now, if there are any questions from anyone, including the FDA. Dr.
Desiree, I had just some numbers that might help
All right.
give us some context. Using the 2016 census numbers of average income of a U.S. household, which is roughly $55,900, you can calculate, based on some of the presentation material the impact economically at roughly going by 3 per 100,000 on a 320 million person population of the U.S., which is roughly what it is, you come up with about $5.28 billion in lost economic impact. If you were even to downwrite that, saying that the severity of symptoms is only 1.5 people per 100,000, you come up with $2.64 billion in lost economic impact, and that doesn't even include the productivity numbers that would be associated with that, which could be possibly as high as threefold. Along with the fact that numerous of the people that have expressed their stories are college educated, thus raising that mean standard of deviation by 2, possibly 3x that number. The monumental impact just by numbers is sheerly mind-staggering. So it's something to definitely think about.
I think we should write that up. Okay, I guess I'm assigned to, I spoke too long, but I get the assignment. See, that's how it works. Questions, because Herb is here, Carl's here, John's here. There are a number of us in the audience that all belong to the Porphyrias Consortium. Let me just say that I was so pleased in hearing so many of you say that you want to participate in research, or that you are participating in research, because that's the way we're going to develop new drugs, and we're going to try and beat this disease. So, and change your lives. We need to do that. We heard today dramatically how this disease really affects people. And it sort of blows me away in a way, because you're all still so positive. I did hear some, how devastating the disease is, that people are seriously trying to figure out how to survive. But at the same time, it must be a human condition that we...
Courageous.
They're courageous. They're courageous and they're hopeful.
Yes.
And that really is what brought you here. And I will just say that we, as the medical people, and those that probably would make the diagnosis, we are so taken with your stories, because each of us have heard those stories and the odyssey that you go through and the so forth. But I don't want to steal any of John's thunder, because John's going to summarize. Questions? Please.
I know when I was diagnosed, I was told it was rare, and I didn't know it was so many people who had porphyria, let alone who had the type of porphyria that I have. That was many years ago. So with so many people having it, how do we go about them removing it from being this rare, unheard of thing to it actually being part of our up-and-coming doctors' knowledge base? Because there are a lot of people with porphyria now. It's not a really small group of us.
It's still a rare disease.
And it is still rare, but it's rare because there's no knowledge.
No, it's rare because of the number of patients. It's not rare because of the knowledge. It's rare because there's a number of patients. The number of patients. So, but you're right. If we had the ability to let all doctors know, and we're trying our hardest. The foundation's trying our hardest to do that. But it takes a lot of finances. It takes a lot of hard work, and we're trying.
So I'm a geneticist, and I can tell you there are 10,000 genetic diseases. And for a physician to learn all 10,000, forget about it. Not going to happen. You want them to understand common disorders and how to treat them well. And that's why you need specialists. And all of you go through that odyssey, and there's so many that don't get diagnosed for so long that that's something we have to change. And I think that when we have treatments and more treatments, that doctors will get into it and will recognize it, because in America, no doctor wants to have a malpractice suit. And sometimes that happens because they never got diagnosed. And I've always said that when there's a treatment for a disease, it changes awareness, because then those doctors have to be aware, make the diagnosis, and have to be able to treat. So I'm not defending your doctor. I'm trying to explain why it happens that patients go through these odysseys. And being a geneticist, and we deal with so many different diseases that are rare, the odyssey is the common feature. It takes many, sometimes years before the diagnosis is made, and multiple different doctors until you find the one that, oh, I saw that patient, or I heard about that, or oh, that urine in that cup, it's port wine red. I got the diagnosis. And that's how it happens. So, Carl?
I think what we need to do from the medical side is to get porphyria to be part of the workup for abdominal pain, because at present it isn't. And I can give you another example. Many of us work on liver disease, and it's very standard when you see a liver disease specialist. It doesn't matter what kind of liver disease you have already, whether it's diagnosed or not. We always screen for certain rare liver diseases. You know, Wilson's disease, alpha-1 antitrypsin, hemochromatosis. We just do it routinely. And so those cases are picked up. And that screening, you know, we always talk about a high index of suspicion. That is done with a low index of suspicion. And but when somebody is seen by anybody working, a patient goes to the ER with abdominal pain, there's a certain routine that's done, but AIP is not in that routine. And so we need to get it into medical practice so it's screened for more often, even when there's a low index of suspicion. And we just had the problem that the screening kit for PBG was taken off the market. Well, the reason was nobody was using it. And we need some replacement for that kit to be in hospital laboratories so emergency physicians can order that test and get a result within an hour or so. So I think we got a lot of work to do on the medical side for that.
We need that GI panel.
Okay, so Dr. Kaminskis and I have been listening to your experiences, and we understand that you have a disease which needs additional therapy, but I want to ask you, how many in the room have participated in a clinical trial? Okay, and how many would be willing to participate in a clinical trial if it were offered? Okay. This helps the FDA as well as the pharmaceutical sponsors to understand that there are actually people out there who are willing to participate in these trials. I wondered if anybody could come up and speak to their experiences on a clinical trial, good and bad, so we would have an idea of how these went for the particular individual.
Thank you so much for asking and for the interest in it. So I'm kind of a part-time professional guinea pig, I guess. I've participated in every trial I've been eligible for, including I was patient number 8 in the Spanish AIP gene therapy trials. I moved my family to Spain for 4 months to participate in gene therapy trials, and it was a wonderful opportunity, even though it didn't actually help me, because it was valuable research and information to move the level of understanding of the disease and the treatment options forward. And I'm blessed to be participating now in a new ongoing clinical trial for pharmaceutical intervention with RNAi. I'm optimistic about the level of research we're doing. My team is amazingly competent. and overall the experience of being involved in clinical trials for me has been the only thing that keeps me going because a lot of times living with this disease is horrifically depressing. And envisioning a future where I continue to suffer the way that I have, and that I get to look forward to some of the horrible things that I've heard about people suffering today is not any way to live. So the thing that keeps me moving forward is the opportunity for developments in clinical trials, the opportunity to participate and benefit, but most importantly, that I can help move the needle of the research so that my children and Diana's children and all of your children won't need to go through the horrifying ordeals of identifying and treating the disease that we have in this room.
Someone else want to comment?
Behind you.
Is this on?
Hello, once again. I've participated in the clinical trials with Dr. Anderson, and I initially participated because that was the only way that I could possibly receive the panhematin treatment. After I was diagnosed in the hospitals, when I initially had my attack, I was given the panhematin then, but afterwards I went through multiple battles with insurance companies trying to get the panhematin. They didn't want to pay for it if you were a patient in the hospital. They told me that I would only be able to get it at an infusion center. And one of my greatest questions would be, because it was brought to my attention that receiving panhematin in the hospital is an $8,000 a day treatment. And at an infusion center, it's between $300 and $400. And to get that, now I'm receiving panhematin infusions at an infusion center. Once I found a doctor that was willing to treat me, because most doctors said they didn't even want to come near me because they hadn't had a porphyria patient before and didn't know how to treat me. So those were some of the issues that I was going through, and with all of those things, that's what led me to the clinical trials. Because, and even with that, it could have possibly been a placebo that I was getting in the clinical trials, but that was out of my desperation to get treatment, was how I became involved with the Porphyria Foundation and with the clinical trials.
Thank you, Jasmine.
Clinical trials?
I would just like to say that I've heard a lot of people, it's great to know that you're not alone, and I used to travel all the time for work and enjoyed it. And I think every one of us would say that any type of travel now is 20, 30-fold more difficult, more challenging than it was before we got sick. But yet, we all travel to go to these clinical trials and to participate. The first time I went to UAB to meet with Dr. Bloomer, I was scheduled to go, and it was about 3 days after I had gotten out of the hospital, being hospitalized for 18 days. And when, no exaggeration, I truly was sick as a dog. And it took both my aunt and uncle taking time off from their jobs to go with me and to help me literally get into the car, get me into Dr. Bloomer's office, back to the hotel. And despite that, I was ready to go again. And I believe that all of us are ready to do that, and here's why. If we don't advocate for ourselves, who will? If any disease needs an awareness week, everyone knows about breast cancer. Everyone knows about prostate cancer. And there's awareness weeks, and you say, oh, you have this or you have that, and you say, I have porphyria, and it's like the dog ear tilt. Well, what is that? So I don't have any doubt that everyone in this room. Yes.
Every week
right.
for 35
yes.
years.
And we need that.
It's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard.
And so I think that's why everyone in this room, everyone that I've talked to on Facebook or message, we're in it. We will go anywhere for the trial. We will beat up our bodies. We will do what we need to do because we have to be our own advocates.
So I just want to say that NIH supports the Porphyrias Consortium. We had an original 5-year grant. We renewed that. We're in the 6 to 10 years, and it's a, it brings the American Porphyria Foundation, and we have 6 original sites plus 2 other sites. And our job is to do clinical research. And we have identified a series of, for all the porphyrias. And some of you have mentioned the longitudinal study. And if we ask Katanchi Nayak, who is the coordinator of our efforts, how many AIP patients do we have? Do you have that number? Over 200. That means there have been over 200 patients that have physically come to one of our centers, been examined, participated in multiple questionnaires, and participate in the follow-up as we're studying the natural history of the disease. We do this for each of the porphyrias. So we need your participation. I'm going to ask some of the docs to stand for a minute and just to point out where they're from. So Carl is from Galveston in Texas. Monty Bissell is at the University of California, San Francisco. Joe Bloomer, Joe, is in Alabama, Birmingham. Bruce Wang is also at UCSF. Dr. Bawani is my boss at Mount Sinai, but her boss is right there. Aswani Singhal, who's at Birmingham. John Phillips, who's at the University of Utah. Who am I missing? We're all there. And, you know, about 8 years ago, we put together this group, and I want to tell you that it's very important that we learn about these diseases, and it's been a learning experience for us, and we're the guys who write the chapters in the book, but we learned a lot today from you. And there are 2 satellite centers, one in Miami with Cynthia Levy, and one at the University of Washington in Seattle. So
we have 2 quick questions.
Good, let's do them.
Do doctors diagnose all over the world the same way?
Boy, I don't know. I have to do a lot more travels. I will tell you. Yep. So we do most of the DNA analysis in my lab, and I get samples from Sri Lanka, from India, from all over the world, and we do them gratis. So we're always there to help diagnose patients. South America, same story. But the usual thing is.
This question is not about bringing them into you.
No.
This question is, do people in Europe diagnose? There's a lot of people with questions about their diagnosis. They think that you have a way to do it this way, and the people in Sweden do it a different way, and a different way.
I see.
And that is not.
No, it's usually the biochemical tests that are done throughout the world where they're set up, and particularly in developed countries. In Europe, they have regional centers in each of the countries. So those samples all go to expert centers for diagnosis. And the typical diagnosis is measuring PBG and ALA in the urine, sometimes in the plasma. And then the next step, when you're not symptomatic or your relatives, is to do the DNA, because that will pick you up whether you're, once the affected patient is known and the lesion in the gene is known, then you pick up all the other family members. Please.
There's a lot of controversy involving the research projects with people thinking that they're going to get their diagnosis taken away. Could you address that, and is it possible for a person to come down there, if you find out they don't have it, how do you address that? And so you call their doctor and tell them.
Desiree, you do it, right? You take away their diagnosis.
I don't take anything.
So I appreciate what you're saying, because there are patients that don't have AOA and PPG diagnoses. That's the gold standard. And, you know, to do a genetic diagnosis is another level. But if you are symptomatic and if you're having problems and your doctor thinks you have it, AOA and PBG in the urine, it's not an expensive test. It's, you know, and it's not influenced by a lot. A lot of people are thinking that, well, light influences it and how long it sits and so forth. You know, if you have a high level, you have a high level, and you're not going to change that very much. And I'm going to turn it over to Carl, because Carl's lab runs more AOA and PBG probably than most other places in the world.
Well, there are a lot of people who are misdiagnosed as having porphyria, and so I guess those people might have their diagnosis taken away if they're really get tested properly or the tests are interpreted properly. But you could say that's, you know, it's good to know what they don't have and then find out what they do have. I also think there are a lot of people who have symptoms that medicine can't explain right now. And so I don't think they're diseases that haven't been described yet. So many of these people that they don't find another diagnosis. And so there's a big problem with that. I also think, you know, in terms of ALA and PBG, I think we're learning, we've always said in the past that if somebody was having symptoms now and their ALA and PBG were normal, it couldn't be from porphyria. And now that we're learning more about the natural history and recognizing that people have so much chronic pain, that that may not be true, that over time there may be nervous system damage that we don't really know about, that we can't, and that's why people have this chronic pain. So that's why we need to learn more about the natural history of porphyria.
But you're not talking about major.
Well, ALA and PBG are still, yeah. It's then you say, well, how can, if somebody's having an acute attack, the ALA and PBG will be high. You know, we've seen talked to a lot of people today that have chronic pain. I would expect some of those people don't have high ALA and PBG right at the same time, but they're having their chronic constant pain. And that's something we need to study more.
But Dr. Anderson, that is different from an attack. When
Right.
you have an attack, you've said your ALA and PBG is going to be high. And these are people whose ALA and PBG are not high during an attack.
Right.
That's the difference.
Right.
And very quickly, because I know we have to stop, I think it's important to know that these people complaining of their diagnosis being taken away, what happened, they volunteered for research, and then they have to get a real diagnosis, and they don't understand why you can't take my diagnosis. Because a research project, you have to have a real diagnosis, and they found out that they did not have it. And so they think that it was only because of research. The research is the same diagnosis. If you're on research, that's the problem. It's the same, it's not different. I think we need to sum it up now,
Yeah.
Dr. Phillips.
Okay, Dr. Phillips.
Actually, I'm going to step to the podium.
All right.
Because I have notes.
Can I get,
Do you want us to get down there?
No.
No, you're all right.
You're all right. So, I don't have any slides because summing up is something that's based on what we heard today. And so, really, the first thing I want to do is I want to start off by thanking Desiree and the American Porphyria Society for without all of this effort, you all wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be engaging the FDA. We wouldn't be trying to figure out how to meet your needs. The second group of people I think that it's very important to recognize are the patients that are here. One of the things I want to make sure that the FDA recognizes is all the people that are here, they're here because they are suffering from this disease and they want to make sure that something is being done. And then the third group is actually the FDA. I mean, I think it's the gentleman that spoke at the very beginning. I think it is very important that we all recognize that this dialogue between, federal regulators, medical experts, and patient advocacy groups and the patients themselves, by everyone coming together, that is how we will be able to identify clinical questions that need to be addressed. We will be able to do clinical trials to look at new therapies. So that was the first thing. I have this broken down into a few different general categories. First of all, diagnosis. So, as Dr. Desnick pointed out, there are 6 centers, primary centers in the United States, plus 2 satellite centers that are funded by the National Institute of Health and the Office of Rare Diseases. So, as there were questions about rare disease, there is a specific arm of the NIH that is responsible for looking at rare diseases and trying to be advocates for, not for prostate cancer, not for, breast cancer, but for these super rare diseases that you all have discussed today. So remember, it's our tax dollars at work there that are providing the basis for this. However, there is clearly an unmet need in diagnosis. You heard several times today that even in Utah, we somehow did not provide accurate, timely diagnosis for a patient. They ended up suffering because of whatever that diagnostic waterfall is that happens. That was not recognized. So, education. Education is clearly important. It's education of doctors. Somebody asked, why is it that, it's so hard for people to know about this? Bob gave you the example that there are 10,000 different genetic diseases that are out there, and it's impossible for any one person really to know all there is to know about these. But education is clearly needed. The American Porphyria Foundation, if you go out there on the table, there are pamphlets out there. Take those, bring those back to your primary care physician, have one of them in your pocket, so when you go to the emergency room, you have that information. If you contact the APF, there are kits that they will send to you to bring to your physician. I think that's important. Education of patients, so that patients understand how to talk about their disease. We, through the consortium and the APF, we try to do that. I think that's very important. That's part of that unmet need. And then, as we heard, education of family members and caregivers, so that the right care can be given at the right time, with compassion, with understanding for what each individual is going through. The disease, that's the next sort of major category. You'll see I have lots of notes. Clearly, the symptoms can be very severe and debilitating. One thing that is apparent from today, it's the accumulation of ALA due to defects in genes in the early part of the heme biosynthetic pathway. That's what causes this. The disease itself is, you heard multiple descriptions of the pain, the sort of memory fog, things like that that are surrounding this, the weakness. Those are all things that are very, very, very common in all of these patients. The other thing that I heard with regard to the disease is that more studies are needed, whether it's continuation of the longitudinal study, whether it is a specific study about, people that are older, what are the symptoms for people that have had the disease for 20 or 30 years? What are the problems with people that have had the disease, for 2 or 3 years? I think that is very apparent. Pain control is a problem. I'm going to come back to that. There are longer-term problems that clearly have not become apparent to us as specialists, that can only be identified by studying larger groups of people. The other thing is there was discussion about the financial impact. As we enter a new era of healthcare models and healthcare delivery, I think it is very important that we understand the financial impact of these diseases, all the porphyrias, on sort of the healthcare system and the sequela of that. The next sort of major category here on my list is diagnosis and treatment. So treatment, certainly IV heme. You heard from several individuals about how IV heme saved their lives. I think that it's very important to recognize that. I think you also heard that there are some people that are refractory, or where heme infusion is not particularly effective. What does that say to me? It says to me that there are other treatment options needed. The idea that you can get glucose and that's going to solve your problem. You heard from several individuals that it does help, but also it does not solve your problem. There are the GnRH agonists that people try. Those also can be effective for some people for some periods of time, but let's not forget about the other gender. Men with acute intermittent porphyria. I mean, that there's an unmet need in those individuals. That's one less treatment option that that subgroup of people have. So I think it's very important that we recognize all of these things. Gene therapy. We heard about gene therapy, and there certainly are multiple attempts across the nation at treating genetic diseases with gene therapy. As new technologies sort of are developed, I think that those options may become available, but they're not today's option, I don't believe. We heard about transplant, and how great transplant is and how it changes people's lives. Through part of some of the other work that I do at the University of Utah, I will tell you, I see the devastating effects of transplant. Transplant is not something to be taken lightly, yet you hear people say, I'm willing to take the risk so that I don't have to have this disease. So I think, there is certainly that. The next category then is unmet need. Clearly, new drugs are absolutely needed. The idea that, for whatever reason, the availability of panhematin is going to be limited due to supply chain issues, shipping issues, issues we heard that people can't be prescribed the drug if they're in the hospital. I think there are certainly ways around that, and I think if you talk to some of the patient advocacy groups, they can sort of help you with that. But clearly, with a single option like that, that tells you right away that there is need for new drugs. And I think the other thing that people pointed out is the options that are out there right now are options to sort of ameliorate the severity of the attack, but there aren't really any options out there other than transplant that we heard for quote-unquote cure. So I think that also leads me to believe that there are additional options needed. And then I guess the final category on my list is quality of life. I think one of the underlying themes, and I don't mean to sort of generalize this, but it's lack of productivity of individuals. Every single person that spoke today with a porphyria pointed out their inability to participate, and that inability to participate was in the work setting, in their family setting, personal productivity. I think that we need as a group to understand what that means. The other thing that I wanted to mention was, and I will term it humiliation. The humiliation that people suffer when they go to a healthcare setting and they're treated as a drug seeker, they're treated as crazy. These issues can only be addressed through education, research, and information. Again, I want to point out the great things that the APF does. They have a website that you can direct physicians to that will provide, safe and unsafe drugs, that will provide treatment options for physicians. There's information for caregivers, as well as through the Porphyria Consortium. We also have a website. It's clear that people want more options. And then finally, research. I think it was the odd patient out that did not raise their hand when it was asked who would be willing to participate in a clinical trial. I looked around, it seems like everyone is willing to participate. That gives me hope that there will be options available to everybody as we move forward. And again, the financial burden is significant, and it often leads to financial ruin. I think we need to understand what is the cost to society for this group of rare disorders. And that's sort of my summation.